Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio this afternoon is Deputy First Minister's Responsibilities, Economy and Gaelic. And at question number 1, I call Foysol Choudhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussion the Economy Secretary has had with business leaders regarding work to maximise the economic impact of Edinburgh's festival.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we're always working with Edinburgh's festivals to maximise those economic opportunities to complement the year-round efforts of each of these flagship cultural events. Alongside the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society, I convened a roundtable on Friday, 22nd of August, with business, data, diplomatic leaders, exploring how we can collectively maximise the Fringe's economic impact. And with last month's outstanding Edinburgh Festival programmes in mind, I congratulate the artists, the performing companies, the production teams, supporting staff and everyone whose work makes Edinburgh's festivals a global cultural highlight.
Foysol Choudhury.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for the answer. We know how important our cultural and creative sectors are to the economy and how they can drive growth. In her meeting with businesses following Edinburgh's festival, did the Deputy First Minister highlight the benefits of investing in culture and corporate sponsorship of cultural events? Will she commit to further engagement to support private investment in our cultural and creative sectors?
Deputy First Minister.
The short answer is yes, I do commit to ongoing engagement. And Foysol Choudhury identifies a number of different funding sources. The Scottish Government has obviously provided funding to support the Fringe this year, but around that table there were comments being made from international leaders in particular about how much their own governments invest in supporting those that are performing from their nations at the Fringe, highlighting the fact that this is a global phenomenon and we are very proud to continue to support it.
A supplementary, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's festivals are a vital part of our cultural landscape, a boost to tourism and an important part of our regional economies. Can the Deputy First Minister say any more about how Scottish Government is working to support festivals in the wider cultural sector in Scotland through the increased funding in the 2025-26 Scottish Budget?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, as a result of the biggest increase in culture funding in the history of the Parliament, Scotland's festivals have benefited from significant increases in core funding through Creative Scotland's multi-year funding programme. And a third of funding recipients run a festival, and a number of those are receiving multi-year funding for the first time. Last month, we also announced the creation of an expanded Festivals Fund. The application process opened today, Wednesday the 3rd of September. It's administered by Creative Scotland and it supports non-profit arts and cultural festivals across Scotland. The £1.8 million fund will provide up to £200,000 in grants per festival in its first year to those not already in receipt of Festival Expo funding.
Supplementary, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. Such is the success of Edinburgh's festivals that at one point last month, Edinburgh was the most expensive destination in the world for people to visit. And there are concerns in the industry about the perception of Scotland as a high-cost destination. Would the Deputy First Minister agree with the evidence we heard in the Economy Committee this morning that councils need to take that into account? Councils like Edinburgh need to take that into account when considering setting the visitor levy, which is coming down the track.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, the member is right to highlight the overall costs of the festivals, and accommodation costs being one of the biggest challenges across the fringe ecosystem, as it were, because it affects artists, visitors and residents. And one of the priority areas for the strategic partnership for Scotland's festivals that is led by Angus Robertson is to look at that issue in greater detail. The member will also be aware of some of the wider support for artists, particularly the Keep It Fringe fund, which is administered to reduce financial barriers for artists performing at the fringe. And we need to look more broadly at what to do in order to keep the fringe accessible to as many artists as possible.
Question number 2 has been withdrawn. At question number 3, I call Daniel Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it has taken on digital exclusion to address the weakened national leadership referred to by Audit Scotland in its report Tackling Digital Exclusion, which was published 12 months ago.
Minister Richard Lochhead.
The Government welcomes the report and is working with local government to take action on digital exclusion. Our approach has evolved since the pandemic, but our commitment remains firm. We are tackling root causes of digital exclusion while developing sustainable ways to mitigate its impact. A refreshed digital strategy developed with COSLA will set a national direction, followed by an action plan with measurable outcomes. We are embedding inclusion into public services, ensuring that access is not an afterthought as well. And we will continue to lead cross-sector collaboration, including through the Digital Inclusion Alliance, addressing digital exclusion as a national priority.
Daniel Johnson.
While she may not be answering the question, may I just take this opportunity to say I was saddened that the Deputy First Minister won't be returning at the next election. She will be missed by this Parliament. According to the Lloyds Consumer Index, 15% of adults lack foundational digital skills and 9% of households have no internet access. That's not just digital exclusion, it's exclusion from healthcare, education and democracy. But 12 months on from the report, we've not had a strategy. Indeed, the SCVO has withdrawn from working with the Scottish Government because, I quote, they fundamentally disagree with the direction of travel. And despite £764,000 coming from the UK Government's £9.5 million Digital Innovation Fund, there are no plans from the Scottish Government on how it plans to spend that money. So will the Minister set out how they tackle digital exclusion, and how will they spend that £764,000 coming to them?
Minister.
We welcome the fact that the UK Government are now taking action on digital exclusion, and we want to work with them on that and welcome the resource that will come to Scotland as part of the budget mentioned by the member. Once that cash is with us and we work out with the likes of COSLA and other sectors on the refreshed strategy I referred to, that will be put to good use on top of the existing budget for Connecting Scotland. It's already underway and being spent tackling this. But we do have to find new ways, because the member's quite right, a 15% gap is 15% too much, and especially in this day and age when AI and other technologies are becoming increasingly important, and everyone should have the same opportunity to take advantage of the digital world in which we now live. And it's important that we have the voluntary sector, business community and government, public sector all working together on this. That's the solution, I believe, going forward. That will be at the heart of the new strategy. I very much welcome the partnership just announced, I think it was just last week, between Virgin Media, O2 and the Citizens Advice Bureau. And the Scottish Government assisted that partnership, which is going to deliver thousands of free smartphones to vulnerable groups within Scotland. And that shows what can be achieved by working together. So we have to certainly support that going forward.
And supplementary, Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Keeping Scotland at the forefront of digital literacy and innovation is a priority that will enable Scotland to pioneer the industries of the future. So can the Minister say more about Scotland's upcoming Innovation Week and how we can maintain this momentum for both our economy and also our society?
Minister.
Well, the member raises a good point. I'm very excited by Scotland's first National Innovation Week that's taking place later this month. I hope members pay attention to that. It will be displaying and showcasing a lot of the amazing innovation underway throughout every single corner of Scotland. And digital inclusion is an important area that can be supported by digital innovations. And of course, I have met many companies over the last couple of years working on new devices, software, etc., that can benefit people who are sometimes a bit harder to reach. And I think the member raises a very important dimension to National Innovation Week in Scotland's track record and pedigree in innovation.
Question number 4, Elena Whitham.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the recently published NatWest Group and Beauhurst's new Startup Index, indicating that Scotland has one of the fastest growing startup economies in the UK.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I am hugely encouraged by the NatWest New Startup Index that shows Scotland's strong performance in business formations. Scotland saw a 17.9% growth in new business incorporations compared to 2024, demonstrating significant momentum in the startup economy. We are by far the fastest growing startup economy in the UK and one of the fastest growing in Europe. And that growth is not accidental. It is thanks to sustained investment and focus by this government and policy choices like the Tech Scaler programme, alongside the ambition and the hard work of Scotland's innovators and entrepreneurs who should be enormously proud of themselves.
Elena Whitham.
Does the Deputy First Minister agree with me that this report shows that Scotland is the fastest growing startup economy in the UK and one of the fastest growing in Europe, with investment growing by 120% in just over 4 years? And that this remarkable progress has been achieved by forward-thinking Scottish Government policies in the face of Brexit damaging trade and labour markets and successive UK governments failing to deliver the investment that Scotland needs, especially in rural communities such as mine in Carrickcumnock and Doon Valley, where all and any opportunities such as positive growth from this is very much welcome.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, it's certainly encouraging to see this output from the work that we've been undertaking over the last few years to change our enterprise support from being quite generic to instead vastly improve the scale and the quality of infrastructure that's tailored to high growth founders. Scotland's transformation into one of Europe's fastest growing startup economies is a testament to that ambition, the resilience and the innovation of our people and our businesses. The 120% growth in investment over just 4 years isn't just impressive, it's a clear signal that our forward-thinking policies have delivered real results. And that's working in partnership with a number of different organisations, kicked off, of course, by Scotland's first chief entrepreneur, Mark Logan.
Question number 5, Jamie Halker-Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what analysis is undertaken on the impact of increased taxation by the United Kingdom, Scottish and local governments on people and businesses across the Highlands and Islands.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
Ministers have regular discussions with their colleagues on a range of issues that have an economic impact, including growth and taxation. In terms of recent tax rises, of most concern to us is the additional burden created by the UK Government's decision to change employers' national insurance rates and thresholds. This will undoubtedly be having an impact on businesses in the Highlands and Islands and across Scotland, and the UK Government's own economic impact assessment confirmed these changes will result in lower employment and higher costs for businesses across the UK.
Jamie Halker-Johnson.
Businesses across the region are facing growing pressures on their bottom line with increased energy costs, regulation and tax bills. Meanwhile, their customer spend is impacted by the cost of living issues, as well as ongoing increases in their own taxes, most notably council tax. In Orkney, 2 popular local hospitality businesses announced before the summer that they're closing their doors. Others I spoke to during my summer tour of the Highlands and Islands were clear. They're not sure that their businesses, even with the huge effort and sacrifices owners and staff often put in, are sustainable in the long term. And they don't feel that the Scottish Government, or UK or local governments for that matter, truly understand the real crisis facing our restaurants, pubs and bars, nor the devastating impact of policies being wrought on the sector. So does the Minister recognise their concerns? And if he does, what will the Scottish Government do to better support our hospitality businesses?
Minister.
Can I say at the outset, as a member who represents a constituency within the member's region, I'm very familiar with some of the issues and concerns of my local businesses, and these are reflected throughout the Highlands and Islands and indeed many parts of Scotland. And I certainly absolutely recognise the pressures facing many of those, particularly smaller businesses, at the moment. And indeed, the First Minister and the Chamber of Commerce in Scotland just have made representations to the UK Government in terms of their forthcoming budget and to ensure that measures come out of that to alleviate the massive pressures on businesses. The businesses I speak to do talk to me largely about national insurance contributions, VAT and tourism, a range of other issues that, of course, are the responsibility of the UK Government. Of course, likewise, in Scotland, we have to take those pressures into account, as do local authorities, in terms of some of their decisions in the coming months as well, to pay attention. I should also say that the Deputy First Minister, of course, raised some really exciting statistics in terms of new businesses being created in Scotland, with record-breaking increases in the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year. And a pleasant surprise from those statistics was that the sector with the biggest representation and increase of new businesses was hospitality. So clearly it's patchy across the country, and that's not to talk down the very real pressures facing the hospitality sector at the moment, which is from a variety of areas. But I speak to these businesses very regularly, and I want to congratulate the Pier, a new cafe in the hospitality sector in Lossiemouth, which has just opened in the last couple of months. And there's new businesses out there doing a great job against very tough backdrops, and we should congratulate them for resilience.
Thank you, Minister. I call by way of supplementary Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Spiralling energy costs and Labour's national insurance hike are squeezing the public sector and businesses alike and limiting an ability to grow and invest. So does the Minister agree with me that Labour must urgently abandon this tax on jobs? And can he say any more about the support the Scottish Government is offering to businesses in Scotland's Highlands and Islands? Minister.
I join Emma Ruddock in terms of her appeal to the UK Labour Government, who, when they were first elected, said they had a mission of growth, and yet they went on to introduce an increase in tax for businesses, which is causing real problems. And if I had £1 for every time a business raises this with me, I'd be a very, very rich person. It's such a huge issue. It's the biggest issue, perhaps equivalent to energy, being expressed by small businesses and businesses throughout Scotland at the moment. And I really do appeal to the Labour Party to take that on board in the forthcoming budget. It's crippling businesses the length and breadth of Scotland, rising energy costs when they were promised lower energy costs, and rising business costs when they were promised a mission of growth.
Question number 6, I call Tim Eagle, who is joining us remotely. Mr Eagle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on how growth deals are growing the economy of the Highlands and Islands region.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, the substantial £242.5 million that we are investing in 4 growth deals across the Highlands and Islands will empower and enable regional partners to deliver a wide range of projects tailored to local needs and circumstances. Those projects have been chosen by local partners for their areas and will deliver infrastructure, housing, skills, transport and innovation to drive economic growth at a local and a regional level and secure lasting benefits.
Tim Eagle.
The growth deals are delivering jobs, infrastructure and a certainty in investments, much of which was highlighted in the recent Economy and Fair Work Committee report. However, current levels of inflation remain an ongoing concern. There is also scope to further extend the benefits of the growth deals in areas like Moray by ensuring a fair split of any just transition funds and actively supporting other projects along the energy corridor between Aberdeen and the Green Freeport in Invergordon. Can the Government confirm it is monitoring the effects of inflation and its impact on projects, and also ensure that the just transition funding which impacts Moray and has the potential to expand the projects in the area under the growth deal is split fairly between the 3 council areas?
Deputy First Minister.
So the member raises a number of important issues which are quite high in my list of priorities. He talks about the impact of inflation, and we remain very closely involved with each of the growth deals to understand what is affecting progress, particularly in and around infrastructure. He also talked about some of the other schemes like the Just Transition Fund, and it's long been my view that growth deals established a different way of operating, where it was a tripartite arrangement between the Scottish Government, the UK Government and local authorities that has worked really well, and therefore is a great model, I think, going forward. There's obviously been a number of calls for a second phase of growth deals, and we're very happy to continue to engage with the other two parts of that tripartite arrangement, the UK Government and local authorities, to look at how we progress that. But he's right in talking about funding that's available right now, which can be delivered in response to applications that are made. And we could go into some detail about the various projects that have benefited from Just Transition funding already, but I've been really impressed by what local partners have delivered with the funding that they have received.
And supplementary, Alistair Allen.
I apologise, Presiding Officer, for being slightly late getting to the Chamber. With the island's growth deal now in its delivery phase, positive outcomes are already evident, such as the recent completion of the £2.3 million UHI North West and Hebrides campus transformation project. Could the Government give an update on some of the many other ways where, working in conjunction with the deal, the Scottish Government continues to support the growth of economies across the Highlands and Islands?
Deputy First Minister.
There is a long list that's probably too long to go into in this question and answer session, but I'm more than happy to give Mr Allen chapter and verse in writing. But it could include our allocation of over £56 million to Highlands and Islands Enterprise this financial year to support its work with businesses and communities across the region. We've also approved £7.5 million of funding to support community investments, helping 30 community anchor organisations to provide vital services for their communities. We've got the £33.7 million to develop Stornoway Deepwater Port on the Isle of Lewis. That's a key piece of infrastructure which is needed to optimise opportunities from tourism and renewable energy for the islands, and it's estimated by Scottish Futures Trust to have the capability of unlocking between £5 billion and £7 billion over the next decade. And then, of course, there is direct investment specific to our islands in this year's budget, including £9 million to island-focused investments, in addition to continued support across portfolios like transport, housing and health. As I said, it's a very long list, and I'm more than happy to give Mr Allen that in writing.
Question number 7, I call Willie Rennie.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its discussions with the GFG Alliance, Liberty Steel and Alvan's British Aluminium regarding the company's operations in Scotland.
Minister Ivan McKee.
Scottish Government are in regular contact with management at Alvan's British Aluminium, Liberty Steel, DL and the wider GFG Alliance. The Lochaber businesses are performing well, employing over 200 people, making significant contributions to both the local and Scottish economies. GFG remains committed to the future of the DL plant and have firm plans to restart operations in the near future after securing a contract for 40 kilotonnes of plate for maritime use. I will be providing a statement to Parliament next week to set out further details on the Scottish assets and our discussions with GFG on their future.
Willie Rennie.
There will be scepticism in Lochaber and Lanarkshire, as we've had so many false dawns before. At the smelter, we were promised a wheel-making plant, 2,000 jobs, a billet plant, but none of that has happened. And last month, it was on the verge of being struck off Company's House. The workers at DL have been sitting at home for months as the company can't afford to buy the materials to fulfil any orders. And there's the forced liquidation of the speciality steels business in the UK. If things are going so well, has the company indicated when they will pay back the £7 million loan to the Scottish Government? And how long will the Scottish Government give the GFG Alliance to deliver before it steps in?
Minister.
We're committed to continue to work with the owners, and it's worth recognising the fact that after many years both those businesses are still operating, the two businesses in Lochaber and indeed the business at DL, and continue to maintain employment in those locations, something that was far from certain previously. So I think what the Scottish Government has done there, working with the owners to keep those plants all employing people locally, is not insignificant and needs to be recognised. We'll continue to work with the owners, and we've got significant contingency plans in place for any eventuality should there be any changes in the circumstances. And as I said to the member, I'll be making a statement on this next week, where there will be further opportunity to give more information.
Supplementary, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. News that the Labour Government have taken control of Liberty Steelworks in Yorkshire was another kick in the teeth for the Scottish workers at Grangemouth. Does the Minister agree with me that it would appear Westminster's support for industrial assets and regional economies depends on which side of the border they are found?
Minister, to the extent that that falls within the broad reach of the question tabled by Mr Rennie.
During the general election last year, the Labour Party made bold and far-reaching commitments around intervening to support Grangemouth's transition in the near term. And so far, unfortunately, these commitments have not materialised in the way that we had all hoped. The UK Government's commitment to deploy £200 million from the National Wealth Fund at Grangemouth in the future is to be welcomed, but I believe that we need to see at-scale intervention and to see it now, as we have seen in other parts of the UK, if we are to avert further industrial and employment loss across the industrial cluster.
Supplementary, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm sure that the Minister will welcome the fantastic news on Sunday that Scotland, Glasgow, has won the biggest shipbuilding export order in this country's history with 5 Type 26 frigates to Norway. But the frustration is that no Scottish steel plate, as it currently stands, will be able to supply to that programme unless we get DL back up and running. So can the Minister give his assurance he will do all he can to get DL back and running so we can get steel plate from Scotland into these fantastic Scottish frigates?
Minister.
I give that assurance. As I said, we've been working extensively with GFG, working on the potential for new orders. I indicated that there were maritime orders in the pipeline, and we'll be able to give more information in the near future. And of course, we'll continue to work with the owners to look for other opportunities to get that plant back up and running. But it's worth recognising that it's only through the work of the Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise that that plant is still capable of fulfilling those orders as it's been supported through this period of time.
Question number 8, Michelle Thompson.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Economy Secretary has had with UK Government ministers regarding the potential impact on the Scottish economy of recent developments with the Grangemouth cluster.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I have very regular engagements with various UK Government ministers, not least yesterday, where I met with Michael Shanks, Energy Minister, and we discussed Grangemouth in particular. The Grangemouth Investor Task Force and Grangemouth Future Industry Board continue to be fruitful vehicles for collaboration between the Energy Secretary and UK ministers. And in May, I asked the Secretary of State for Business and Trade for a meeting to discuss wider issues in the Grangemouth cluster to jointly secure the future of INEOS ONP at Grangemouth. And the Minister of State for Industry responded to me on the 29th of August, and I'm very much looking forward to having a discussion in due course.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and as she alludes to, there are increasing concerns being raised about contagion as a result of UK Government policies impacting the energy sector. My immediate concerns are the vital chemical cluster around Grangemouth, but also the Fortis pipeline throughput and therefore ultimate viability. It's clear that the energy profit levy is biting investment hard, and I therefore find it staggering that there's no sign of the promised £200 million, paltry though it may be, from the UK Government. So although discussions have been had, is the Cabinet Secretary any clearer on whether the UK Government plan to follow through on promises made, and therefore on what timescales?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, the member raises a number of very, very important issues. So let me start with the wider cluster. We are very conscious of some of the challenges facing the wider chemicals business. I'm currently meeting monthly with the Chief Executive of INEOS ONP UK to provide an opportunity for the business to update me on how global market pressures in the wider energy landscape are impacting operations at Grangemouth. I'm also engaging directly with the UK Government on those matters, raising it at most of my meetings with the Secretary of State for Scotland, and I'm pleased to see that the Scottish Government has been able to make some progress on that issue. The member then talked about the energy profits levy, and she will have seen my comments yesterday on the need for a very urgent replacement of that fiscal regime, and certainly not waiting to 2030. And then lastly, she talked about some of the wider opportunities that are emerging through Project Willow and how we unlock the National Wealth Fund commitment to funding, and that is a particular priority at the moment. We know that some of those opportunities are far advanced. That was the nature of my conversation with Michael Shanks yesterday, to look at how we progress that to secure the funding and get the opportunities in place.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. That concludes the portfolio questions on Deputy First Minister responsibilities, economy and Gaelic. We will move now to the second portfolio of the afternoon on finance and local government. And at question number 1, I call Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment is made of the impact on the public finances of working age economic inactivity.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The Scottish Government routinely analyses data on economic inactivity, which is produced by the Office for National Statistics. Increasing economic participation can have economic and fiscal benefits, and Scottish Government analysis published last October indicated even a relatively small increase of 0.25 percentage points in the economic activity rate could boost GDP in the long term by around 0.1% or £180 million each year. That's why we are taking action across government to support people to enter, remain and progress in work through devolved employability services, health and work support and various commitments in the programme for government.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Minister for that comprehensive reply. The largest cohort of economically inactive people in Scotland are students, where we have 4-year degrees. Of those seeking work, 72,000 in Scotland received employability support from April 2022 to September 2024. Can the Minister advise which programmes were most successful in returning people to work, what plans there are to roll out such programmes across the country, and the anticipated average annual boost to both individual and the nation's finances of each person who moves out of economic inactivity?
Minister.
Thank the member for that question. As indicated, there's a whole range of programmes in place. As outlined in the programme for government, we have introduced specialist employability support across Scotland to enhance services for disabled people and those with long-term health conditions. And alongside that, we have improved Healthy Working Lives and Working Health Services Scotland to ensure support is available for employees and employers managing health challenges in the workforce. Our devolved employability services, backed by £90 million in 2025-26, play a pivotal role supporting people towards and into sustainable, fair work. And it's worth pointing out that the Deputy First Minister is working with Public Health Scotland and a range of private sector employees on some pilot programmes to help to move those individuals back into work as well.
Supplementary, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. A large proportion of the economically inactive are inactive because of ill health, and Scotland has a particularly poor record when it comes to this. So can I ask when the Scottish Government will develop strategies along the preventative health agenda to prevent people falling into ill health in the first place?
Minister.
The data for economic activity in Scotland is 21.9%. And that's a 1.4% reduction since last year. So that number is moving in the right direction, and it's worth pointing out there are a whole range of reasons for that, including students, as Kenny Gibson pointed out, individuals that have retired, individuals that are at home caring for family members, and around a third is due to ill health. The work in the population health framework, and other work my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care is taking forward, are very much targeted on how we join up economic activity with the health-related support to support those individuals back into work. And the work that I outlined that the Deputy First Minister was taking forward in conjunction with Public Health Scotland and private sector employees is very much in that space.
Supplementary, Willie Rennie.
But mental health, ADHD and autism contribute a significant proportion of that 20-odd% of the population, of working age population, who are economically inactive. But the NHS doesn't really seem to have an effective pathway for ADHD and autism, and the waits for mental health are incredibly long. So what discussions is he having with the Health Department to make sure that we can get the system ready so we can get these people back to work so they can make an economic contribution to the country?
Minister.
As I indicated, there's a range of activities happening with my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, working with Economy Portfolio, Public Health Scotland and others to ensure that those services are joined up and are focused on returning people to work as effectively and as efficiently as possible.
Question number 2, Patrick Harvey.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to support local authorities and other public bodies to apply ethical criteria when deciding whether to divest from sectors such as fossil fuels, arms companies and businesses complicit in occupation or war crimes.
Minister.
Local authorities are responsible for their pension investments, and scheme legislation requires them to publish a statement about their investment principles, which should include the extent of their environmental, social and ethical considerations. The Scottish Government has published a business investment framework and guidance on sustainable procurement, and the Scottish National Investment Bank has a responsible and ethical investment policy. There is also guidance for public bodies on carrying out due diligence checks on companies to see if they are associated with human rights abuses. Public bodies are responsible for deciding their actions in individual cases.
Patrick Harvey.
Presiding Officer, I lodged this question before I was aware that there would be a statement from the First Minister on issues which I hope will touch on this question, and I look forward eagerly to hearing the detail of that. But there is legislation, in local government legislation in Scotland, as my colleague Ross Greer drew the Scottish Government's attention to over the recess, which does place restrictions on local authorities applying ethical criteria in the way that I set out. We're all, each of us, free to apply ethical criteria in our choices. Can the Minister agree that there should be no reason in principle why decisions made collectively on behalf of all of us should be restricted in the ethical criteria they apply on the basis of the political views of democratically elected councils?
Minister.
First of all, the member's correct to say that there, of course, will be a statement by the First Minister later this afternoon, and clearly members will have to wait and see what is contained within that statement. But, of course, as he rightly identifies, it does touch on some of these issues. With regards to the principle, well, first of all, it's important to recognise that in this area there is a mixture of devolved and reserved competence, so it's important that to have an effective policy, we're able to unpick that and understand where the extent of devolved competence is, so that we can legislate accordingly. And in principle, I don't disagree with the comments that he's made.
Question number 3, Ash Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what role the Finance Secretary has in authorising any continued expenditure of public bodies that incur substantial legal costs, including those covered by the Clinical Negligence and Other Risks Indemnity Scheme.
Minister.
Public bodies, including those covered by the Clinical Negligence and Other Risks Indemnity Scheme, are responsible for making their own decisions, including those regarding expenditure and ensuring compliance with the requirements of the Scottish Public Finance Manual issued by Scottish ministers. Whether to pursue, defend or concede any legal claim is therefore a decision for the public body in question.
Ash Regan.
Media reports of the NHS Fife Tribunal, which are highlighting escalating legal costs that ultimately will come from Scotland's NHS budget. Scottish Borders Council also recently lost a judicial review over a primary school's failure to provide single-sex toilets for pupils. So can the Minister confirm whether he is going to look into this issue? Because all recipients of public funding, surely, including local authorities, the third sector and public bodies, such as the NHS and its central legal office, should be fully compliant with the Supreme Court judgment in Forum in Scotland versus Scottish ministers. And I'm wondering if the Minister is considering any action that will be taken against those that fall short of the standards of lawful accountability for public finances. I'm sure that is what the public would rightly expect.
Minister.
Well, first of all, it would of course be inappropriate for myself or Scottish Government ministers to intervene in or comment on ongoing legal cases, and that maintains the independence of the legal process. And as the members are aware, the scheme that we're referring to is set up to share risk across a whole range of organisations to minimise the impact from any specific case. It's important to note that the Scottish Government do not provide public authorities with legal advice, and it's up to each public authority to take their own independent legal advice. Also important to recognise that the membership of the scheme is mandatory for all NHS Scotland health boards, and the cost of the majority of NHS Scotland's legal cases are met by the scheme.
Question number 4, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is working with local authorities to deliver transformation programmes and accelerate any reforms needed to achieve financial sustainability and ensure that local services are fit for the future.
Minister.
Alongside record funding, our public service reform strategy published in June sets out how we are working with local government on programmes such as whole family support and Fairer Futures partnerships to accelerate change, delivering services that are preventative, better joined up and more efficient. By tackling systemic barriers and empowering local leadership, we will ensure services remain sustainable and fit for the future.
David Torrance.
Can the Minister provide reassurance that the Scottish Government will continue to work constructively with councils like Fife, which serves my constituency, to support innovation, protect frontline services and ensure that communities such as Kirkcaldy benefit from sustainable, modernised local services?
Minister.
Yes, I can categorically offer that reassurance, and along with the record funding settlement and early and meaningful budget engagement, the Scottish Government will continue to work in partnership with COSLA and individual local authorities such as Fife around how to ensure we are providing sustainable, people-centred services. We will also continue to engage constructively with the UK Government to highlight the importance of sustainable public services to ensure the people of Scotland continue to receive the high-quality public services they expect and deserve.
Supplementary, Craig Hoy.
Deputy Presiding Officer, the Minister will be aware that SNP-run Dumfries and Galloway Council has withdrawn some key subsidised bus services as a result of what it describes as funding constraints following a widespread review of the region's bus network. From Sanquhar to Langham, this is causing huge difficulty and distress for residents, both young and old. Will the Scottish Government, now as it prepares its next budget, commit to a full and fair funding formula for Scotland's rural councils and ensure that it properly funds Scotland's at-risk rural bus network?
Minister.
Well, of course, those decisions are for local authorities, but it's worth pointing out that the Scottish Government is providing record funding to local government in the current financial year. Discussions are underway. Indeed, my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, is undertaking budget discussions at the moment to make sure we continue to offer ever-increasing amounts of funding to local government. And the funding formula, of course, is a matter for COSLA, who, in conjunction with 32 local authorities, decide how best to allocate that funding across the country.
And supplementary, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Minister is open to the offer made by the UK Government to work in collaboration to strengthen public procurement rules, guidance and even legislation to ensure that local authorities, Scottish Government, can drive greater value from procurement into local supply chains and ensure we get better value to the Scottish economy as a result.
Minister.
We're always in the business of looking for opportunities to further improve in this area, but it's worth recognising when you look at the specifics of what the UK Government is bringing forward. It's very much in the space of trying to catch up with where the Scottish Government already is in terms of procurement rules and procurement practice. And if you look at the data on that, 46% of public procurement spend in Scotland is with SMEs, compared to around 25% south of the border. So we've made significant progress in this area in Scotland and continue to do so. Indeed, I met just with FSB just in the last couple of weeks to talk about what else we can do. But as I say, it's very much a question of the UK Government running to catch up with where Scotland already is.
Question number 5, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what support it can provide to local authorities to help ensure that all residents across the North East can access local council services, including help when things go wrong, in person as well as online.
Minister.
In 25-26, North East Scotland local authorities will receive over £1.8 billion to fund local services, which equates to an extra £120 million, or 7%, to support vital day-to-day services compared to the previous years. Local authorities are, of course, independent corporate bodies with their own powers and responsibilities. However, the Scottish Government will continue to work in partnership with COSLA and individual local authorities to ensure that the people of Scotland continue to receive high-quality public services they expect and deserve.
Maggie Chapman.
Dundee Pensioners Forum and other organisations are calling for the re-establishment of face-to-face access to local council officers. Limited access has curtailed the community's opportunities to address potentially complex issues like those relating to RAC and those associated with maintenance of homes and the surrounding environment. It also excludes particularly those with limited IT access or skills. How will the Scottish Government work with councils to enhance this aspect of community engagement to ensure that all residents, regardless of digital access or skills, can get support when they need it?
Minister.
I'm not aware of the specific situation she's referring to in Dundee, but of course the Scottish Government, through our digital strategy, is very focused on digital inclusion and ensuring that everybody is able to enjoy service provision through digital services, and is to be included in that process. But of course, where there are reasons where that is not possible, then of course public bodies should continue to provide services on a face-to-face basis for those where that is most appropriate. But as I say, the specific situation in Dundee is a matter for the Council there.
Question number 6, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how much funding it's allocated to Eastern Bartonshire Council to help meet any additional costs of providing social care services for an ageing population.
Minister.
Eastern Bartonshire Council will receive revenue funding of £280.6 million in 2025-26 as a result of the Scottish Budget. As a democratically elected body, it is for the Council to determine how to allocate that funding, including funding for social care services based on local needs and priorities. We appreciate the pressures facing health and social care and local government, and that's why we provided record funding for both in 2025-26, including almost £2.2 billion of investment for social care and integration.
Rona Mackay.
I thank the Minister for that answer. With nearly 18,000 people in Strathkelvin and Bearsden, my constituency, now over state pension age, and estimates showing 15% of local pensioners are living in poverty, with more than 1.4 million in pension credit going unclaimed every year, does the Minister agree with me that raising awareness of poverty-reducing benefits is crucial, as is high-quality, sustainable social care?
Minister.
Yes, I do agree with the member, and that's why we have a benefit take-up strategy, of which there is no UK government equivalent, and we are taking steps to tackle barriers to take up and putting money in the pockets of those who need it most. We have allocated £16.9 million in 2025-26 to fund advice services, including Citizens Advice Scotland's Money Talk team, which supported over 12,000 older people last year. Similarly, it is likely that we will use all social care at home. Similarly, it is likely that we will all use social care at some point in our lives, and improving the quality, standards and consistency of care for people is absolutely necessary.
Supplementary, Pam Gozo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Eastern Bartonshire Health and Social Care Partnership has highlighted in its 2025 to 2030 strategic plan that there is a need to move away from traditional services models to a whole-person and community approaches due to financial challenges and increasing demand. In April, council tax for Eastern Bartonshire residents rose by 13%, and the people I spoke to on the doors this summer said they are not receiving value for money. Therefore, what is the Minister's response to all of those who are paying more but risk receiving less when it comes to social care?
Minister.
Well, first of all, obviously the decisions on that are decided locally, and as I've indicated, there is record funding going into the system across local government and social care. But I think the important point that she made in the first part of her question around how most effectively to deliver those services is a really important one, and it gets to the heart of the work we're taking forward in the public service reform strategy, building on the Christie principles to focus on prevention, ensure that the money is most effectively directed to the front line, and to better integrate up public services so that her constituents and indeed others right across the country receive the best possible service they can from local government.
Question number 7, Alec Riley.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what steps it's taking to encourage and support local authorities to empower and enable people and communities to have a greater say over the delivery of local public services.
Minister.
Through our commitment, joint commitment with COSLA to the Democracy Matters process, we are designing new community decision-making arrangements. This aims to increase participation and enhance the role of communities in local service delivery. We are also providing funding for the new City Citizens Assembly pilot in Mr Rowley's constituency, led by the Electoral Reform Society and Fife Council, to enable people to have a greater influence over the future of Scotland's newest city. This is alongside support for local authorities to mainstream participation through the delivery of participatory budgeting and a recent review of the Community Empowerment Act. And I'll just correct myself, of course, it's in Ms Somerville's constituency and Mr Rowley is a regional member.
Alec Riley.
Presiding Officer, back in 2011, the SNP government published the Christie Report. The Christie Report's main recommendations focused on reforming public services in Scotland through empowerment, collaboration, prevention and performance-focused efficiency. It recommended empowering individuals and communities in service design, promoting integrated services through partnerships, prioritising preventative measures and holding services accountable for improving outcomes and value for money. Some 14 years later, I would have to say, in my opinion, very little of what the Christie Report set out has actually been achieved. Indeed, I would argue the centralisation of public services over that period is a complete contradiction to what the Christie Report set out. Will the Minister and does the Government accept that they have failed to implement Christie, and therefore will they look at how we genuinely empower local authorities, taking power out of this place into local authorities so that they can take that power into communities? That's what's failed.
Minister.
Well, I think I agree with the first part of the member's question, but not the second part. The Christie principles are absolutely central to the work that this government is taking forward, and I'm sure the member have read in great detail the public service reform strategy that we published in June, which contained many examples of where those principles had been very effectively applied across a whole range of policy areas, around about prevention, around about empowerment, around about integration and more effective and efficient service delivery. And we continue on that journey in the public service reform strategy. It gives us a very clear direction through its 18 work streams as to how we do that. And as I've already indicated, the Democracy Matters work that the Government is taking forward in collaboration with local authority partners in COSLA about how we take that empowerment and service design agenda down to community level, so to make that as local as possible is hugely important. And I've already indicated the work on the Citizens Assembly we're taking forward in Dunfermline, funded by the Scottish Government, is very much part of that work as well. But I'm always happy to engage with any member that wants to contribute to taking forward this agenda.
I'm just keen to squeeze in the last question. Question number 8, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government for what reason it is reportedly spending over £1 million every week on agency staff, in light of it having announced plans to reduce corporate costs.
Minister.
In support of the budget and wider public service reform agenda, the Scottish Government is proactively addressing the need to control workforce size to remain fiscally sustainable. While within the core Scottish Government, the number of contingent workers he's referring to is now 47% lower than in March 2022. The use of contingent workers has been in decline to support a more managed approach to workforce deployment and reduce cost. Employing temporary and agency workers provide the flexibility required to meet business needs and access specialists and other skills quickly and adapt to our need for resource is short term, and is very, very often the most cost-effective way of providing those services, rather than employing someone full-time where the services may only be required for a short period of time.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Minister for that response. Does the Minister accept that every pound spent on agency staff bureaucracy is a pound taken away from our schools, our hospitals, our local council services, which are already on their knees because of this Government's mismanagement?
Minister.
Well, of course, as he's aware, the Scottish Government works within a fixed budget and balances its budget every single year. And the whole point of the public service reform agenda is to continue to move resources from the corporate functions and deploy them in exactly the way he's talking about in the front line. The strategy contains a number of examples where we've successfully done that, and the example I just cited, where the number of contingent workers is now 47% lower than it was 3 years ago, is another example of that. We'll will continue to deliver on that agenda to free up those resources and make sure they're deployed effectively in an integrated way on the front line.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes portfolio questions on finance and local government. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.
The next item of business is a statement by John Swinney on the situation in Gaza. The First Minister will take questions at the end of his statement. Therefore, there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the First Minister around 15 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, the situation in Gaza is a man-made humanitarian catastrophe. Over 63,000 people in Gaza have been killed and many more maimed. Most of the Strip lies in ruins. And famine now grips the population. In a compelling address to the United Nations Security Council on the 27th of August, Joyce Msuya, the UN's Deputy Humanitarian Chief, advised that famine had been confirmed in north-central Gaza, where Gaza City is located, and that is expected to spread to the south by the end of this month. The scale of suffering is unimaginable. Nobody can ignore it. We must confront this crisis with urgency, compassion and an unwavering commitment to accountability. I know that colleagues across this Parliament share my horror at what is unfolding in Gaza. Presiding Officer, this Government has consistently and unequivocally condemned the terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023, which claimed the lives of over 1,200 Israelis and saw 251 hostages taken. We have joined the international community in demanding the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. All human life is equal, Israeli and Palestinian alike. We have repeatedly called for an immediate and sustained ceasefire by all parties, a call that was endorsed by this Parliament on the 21st of November 2023, and for humanitarian aid to flow unrestricted into the territory. And we have urged the United Kingdom Government to recognise the state of Palestine within the 1967 borders, joining over 140 UN member states and growing, and aligning with the international consensus on a two-state solution. While I welcome the intent behind the decision of the UK Government to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly this month, recognition must not be conditional and should be irreversible. It is the right of Palestinians, not the gift of international powers, and must be backed by sanctions against the Israeli Government. A two-state solution is the only way that Palestinian and Israeli peoples can have a future living side by side in peace and security. The Palestinian people and the Israeli people deserve no less. The Government of Israel has, however, overtly rejected this position, announcing another massive illegal settlement in the West Bank, with Israel's Finance Minister explicitly claiming that the development would bury the idea of a Palestinian state. On Monday, I spoke to Dr. Hussam Zomlot, the head of the Palestinian Mission in London. He described how settler violence and land grabs in the West Bank are accelerating, how it looked different to even 2 years ago, with Palestinian towns and cities behind barbed wire and walls and roadblocks choking mobility across the territory. He told me that the economy was being choked, with unemployment around 50%. He was convinced that the aim of the activity was, as the Israeli Finance Minister set out, to end the prospect of a Palestinian state. The Israeli Security Cabinet's decision to seize Gaza City last month has been condemned by the United Kingdom, the majority of the UN Security Council and senior UN figures. But again, the Israeli Government has paid no heed. We need to act. The UK Government needs to act. I am therefore calling for the immediate recognition of the Palestinian state, strengthened sanctions against those complicit in illegal settlements, and the imposition of sanctions on the members of the Israeli Security Cabinet where they are complicit in the horrors facing civilians in Gaza City. I welcomed the UK Government's announcement in May that it had suspended trade negotiations with Israel, but it is clear that this action has made no difference. It is therefore time for the United Kingdom to withdraw from the UK-Israel Free Trade Agreement in view of Israel's behaviour. I am also calling on the UK Government to follow the example of Ireland and prohibit the import of goods produced in Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. Presiding Officer, this Government has contributed to humanitarian responses to the Gaza crisis, contributing to date £1.3 million for Gaza and the wider Middle East. In November 2023, we provided £750,000 to support access to food, water, shelter and medical supplies for over 670,000 displaced people. More recently, we provided £550,000 for the DEC Middle East Appeal, SCIAF and Mercy Corps. We welcome that the UK Government has committed to supporting the evacuation of Gazan students who have been awarded places at Scottish universities. I have been calling for some time for the UK to end arms sales to Israel. The UK Government's decision to suspend some arms licences was welcome, but I believe should go further. All licensed arms exports should stop. Presiding Officer, I said recently that I shared the concerns of other countries and international leaders that a genocide appears to be unfolding in Gaza. I did not make that claim lightly. The legal determination of genocide is the responsibility of international courts. The International Court of Justice has found a prima facie case that Israel was committing genocide. Under Article 2 of the 1948 Genocide Convention, two conditions must be met for genocide to be established. One, that specific acts such as killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, or inflicting life conditions calculated to destroy a group have occurred. And two, that these acts were carried out with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. Credible, widely documented evidence suggests that both of these conditions may be present in Israel's conduct in Gaza. Over 63,000 Palestinians, the majority of them civilians, including over 15,000 children, have been killed since October 2023. Vital infrastructure, including hospitals, homes, schools and water systems, have been systematically destroyed. Access to food, water and medical aid has been obstructed. The entire population has faced repeated forced displacement, often under life-threatening conditions. Statements by senior Israeli officials include dehumanising language and express intent to eliminate Gaza. Defence Minister Gallant described Palestinians as, and I quote, human animals. Prime Minister Netanyahu invoked the biblical command, remember Amalek, historically associated with collective annihilation. The Finance Minister Smotrich said that Gaza would be entirely destroyed and its civilians relocated to a humanitarian zone in the south before they would leave their homeland. These statements have been cited in South Africa's legal submissions to the International Court of Justice. International legal scholars have argued that they help establish the specific intent required for a finding of genocide under the Convention. Governments must act now. Our neighbours in Ireland were the first government in the European Union to say what the Israeli government was doing was genocide, when the Taoiseach told the Dáil on the 28th of May that the Israeli government was committing genocide in Gaza. The UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese concluded in March 2024 that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating the commission of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza has been met. In April 2025, UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher stated, "This is not a war for security, it is a war to erase a people, and our failure to stop it will haunt our generation and history." The United Kingdom Government should support the international rule of law and join South Africa's case at the ICJ and commit to implementing the ICC arrest warrants. The UK must end military cooperation with the Israeli government while the war continues and the question of genocide remains current. Presiding Officer, I want to address directly accusations that this opinion that I have set out could be seen as anti-Semitic. Let me be clear. I utterly reject anti-Semitism and all forms of racism and hatred. I stand with Scotland's Jewish, Muslim and Palestinian communities and condemn all forms of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and racism. I recognise the trauma experienced by these communities and pledge, as First Minister, to ensure their safety and their dignity. On Monday, I met members of Scotland's Jewish community. I did so because I wanted to reassure them of the respect that I have for the contribution the community makes to all aspects of Scottish life. They are an integral part of Scotland's story. They are a valued and cherished community in Scotland. I recognise, however, that events in the Middle East and reactions to these events here in Scotland do cause anxiety for members of our Jewish community, irrespective of their individual views on the conflict. I also know that members of our community have been affected by Hamas's terrorism in the worst possible way, and again pay tribute to the memory of Bernard Cowan. My condemnation of this Israeli government's actions is grounded in international law, human rights, and belief in the equal value of every human life. Many Jewish organisations and individuals have condemned the assault on Gaza. Their courage reminds us that to speak out against mass violence is not anti-Semitic. It is deeply human. In fact, to speak out is our moral and legal responsibility. Presiding Officer, the challenge to this Parliament, this Government, the United Kingdom Government and governments across the world is that if we agree we are witnessing an unfolding genocide, then what action should we take? I've spoken about the actions I'm calling on the UK Government to take, but let me now turn to what this Government will do. We are instructing relevant delivery bodies, where possible, not to provide support facilitating trade between Scotland and Israel. The UK has treaty obligations and duties in international law to respond appropriately when a situation involving a serious risk of genocide arises. The Ministerial Code under which I operate, Section 1.7, lays a clear responsibility on all ministers to comply with, and I quote, international law and treaty obligations. The International Court of Justice has made it plain that risk exists. Indeed, it said that there is a prima facie case of genocide in Gaza. The Scottish Government cannot ignore this. Previously, we have provided business grants and investment support to companies involved in the design, production, supply and support of military equipment, technologies and services. We do so because we recognise that defending our country, defending our continent, is a duty of government. Anyone watching the war in Ukraine would, I hope, recognise the reality of the importance of defence. Indeed, the invasion shows we live in a world in which our national security faces much greater and more immediate threats. In recognition of that changed international landscape, the Scottish Government will lift the restriction that we have applied on the use of support for the production of munitions. But in the face of genocide, there can be no business as usual. We will pause new awards of public money to arms companies whose products or services are provided to countries where there is plausible evidence of genocide being committed by that country. That will include Israel. The pause will apply where possible to new grants provided or investment made by the Scottish Government, our enterprise agencies and the Scottish National Investment Bank. Any defence company seeking support from the Scottish Government will have to demonstrate that its products are not involved militarily with Israel. The UK Government should review what other steps it must now take in view of the United Kingdom's duty in international law to respond when there is a serious risk of genocide. And the international court must come ultimately to a determination of the case against the Israeli government of genocide. Until we have that clarity, however, new public monies should not go to arms companies involved with the Israeli military. I know there will be people in Scotland, not least apprentices funded by the Scottish Government working on the Clyde, at Rosyth and elsewhere, asking, what does this mean for me? So let me be clear. We've made a commitment, a legally binding commitment to those young people, and it will be honoured. Anyone in an apprenticeship or with a formal offer will continue to be funded in their current place for the full duration of the apprenticeship. Presiding Officer, this is a humanitarian crisis, and Scotland will directly address that humanitarian need. We have a long history of helping those in desperate need, and we will not be found wanting now. I can announce today that we will provide £400,000 to Kids Operating Room to establish the Gaza Hopes Field Readiness Hub in Scotland. This funding will help unlock $50 million of additional funding to deliver a rapidly deployable hospital in Gaza. Designed in Scotland to be built in just a week, it can operate in the most challenging environments and last for decades. It will provide essential surgical, maternity and paediatric services to thousands of patients every year. The hub or pilot hospital will be coordinated from the city of Dundee and will support further deployments, similar deployments in future crises. We will also donate £600,000 to the UN OCHA-led humanitarian fund for the occupied Palestinian territories, which will provide life-saving health services, food and nutrition assistance, emergency shelter, water and sanitation, protection services, education support and cash for families, ensuring aid reaches those most at risk. We have also committed to providing medical support for up to 20 injured children from Gaza and expect the first arrivals along with their families in mid-September. While there are significant challenges in relocating human rights defenders, such as journalists from Gaza at this moment in time, we are determined to do what we can and will explore this and other ways of supporting their vital work at pace. We will support those struggling for justice, however distant a prospect that currently seems. We are exploring practical measures to bring expertise within Scotland's legal establishment, our universities and our civil society to contribute to gathering and preserving evidence that may be used in international criminal cases. Presiding Officer, we are witnessing a humanitarian disaster of historic proportions, and yet the bombs continue to fall. The world cannot wait for a final court ruling before acting. The signs are clear, the alarm has been raised, the bombs and rockets must stop and humanitarian aid must flow. The international community, including the United Kingdom Government, must recognise a Palestinian state as the first step towards peace and a two-stage solution, a solution where the peoples of both Israel and Palestine can live side by side in peace and security. Acknowledging that we are witnessing the signs of genocide brings with it a responsibility to act. The people of Scotland expect no less of us. For the duration of this afternoon's business, I have authorised that the Palestinian flag be raised outside St Andrew's House as an indication of Scotland's solidarity with the people of Palestine. Scotland will always raise her voice in favour of peace and humanity.
Thank you. The First Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I intend to allow around 30 minutes, after which we will need to move on to the next item of business. I encourage members wishing to ask a question who haven't already done so to press the request to speak buttons. And I call first Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We must never forget the horrors of October the 7th, 2023, the rape, murder and kidnap of innocent Israelis at the hands of Hamas terrorists. And we are all deeply disturbed by the horrors of what is happening in Gaza, with so many innocent civilians, adults and children, killed while others starve. The events in the Middle East are a blight on humanity, and I don't doubt the sincerity of the First Minister's feelings. But I also believe that this Parliament should focus the powers it has to improve people's lives here in Scotland. I believe that issues here need our full and urgent attention. Drugs deaths are the worst in Europe for the 7th consecutive year. Many communities live in fear of serious violence. Lives are being lost due to chronic problems in the NHS. I would rather Mr Swinney provided a statement on these issues for which he has responsibility. But since this statement is before us, I would like to ask John Swinney about his demand to immediately recognise Palestinian statehood. This will be seen by many as premature, impractical and counterproductive. John Swinney says that he has spoken with Scotland's proud and valued Jewish community in an attempt to allay their concerns. So my question is, what does he expect their reaction will be to his statement today?
Before I call the First Minister, can I remind members, as emotional as this topic may be, We have listened to the First Minister with respect. We will listen to others with questions with the same respect. First Minister.
President Officer, I agree with Russell Finlay that we should never forget what happened on the 7th of October 2023, and I agree with him that we should never forget what's going on in Gaza just now and has been going on in Gaza for some considerable time. I willingly accept my responsibility for the issues for which I have responsibility. I was here leading a debate on those questions yesterday. I will be here tomorrow answering First Minister's questions, as I do every Thursday, and I will appear here whenever Parliament asks me to appear here to account for my actions. Some of my responsibilities are covered in this statement, which is about the way in which our enterprise agencies operate. That is my responsibility, and I have to explain to Parliament the approaches that we are taking. On the question of the recognition of the Palestinian state, I don't think it's premature. I think it's long overdue, to be honest. And long overdue by multiple decades, Presiding Officer. And lastly, I met with the Jewish community on Monday. I did so to explain to them face to face what I was thinking about the way in which this issue had to be handled. It's not the first time I've met the community. I have had regular meetings with the community. I am certain the community will be disappointed by some of the things that I've said today. I'm not in any way in doubt about that. But I have to look at the situation in Gaza. I have to think about the responsibility that my ministers carry to act within the law, and that has underpinned the central decision that I have announced here today, because I'm expected as First Minister, as are my ministers, and I expect it of them to operate within the law. And the current situation in relation to the case of genocide puts ministers in a position that if we don't take the actions that I am taking today, we could be in risk of not operating within the law.
Ms Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the situation in Gaza is beyond intolerable. The deliberate starvation of children, the killing of innocent civilians trying to access aid, the collective punishment of a population with tens of thousands killed, schools, hospitals, lives destroyed. We need the bloodshed to stop right now. There must be an immediate ceasefire, the free flow of humanitarian assistance, the release of hostages so they are back with their families where they belong, and a pathway to a two-state solution with lasting peace. I am clear that Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal and clearly breaching international law. He is more interested in staying in power and out of jail than he is interested in peace, and he must be held to account and face justice for his actions. Let me also be clear that Hamas is a terrorist organisation that committed brutal atrocities on October 7, 2023, and they too have no interest in peace. But the people of Palestine and Israel deserve to live in peace, freedom and security. Diplomacy, international engagement and building partnerships to work towards peace matters. That's why I welcome the significant decision by the UK Government that we will recognise a Palestinian state before the UN General Assembly this month, a move done alongside allied nations such as France, Australia, Canada, Belgium and others. Does the First Minister also agree with the actions taken by the UK Labour Government to remove the block on the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, to remove the block on UNRWA and restore its funding, to introduce Project Pure Hope to evacuate injured Gazan children and treat them here in the UK, and to sanction Israeli ministers who have incited settler violence? Presiding Officer, this has gone on too long. The world has failed. The illegal occupation and genocide must end now.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I very much welcome the comments made by Mr Sarwar. I agree with his characterisation of the situation in Gaza. I agree with his description of Hamas as a terrorist organisation that are not interested in peace, and I agree with his call for there to be international focus on the use of international institutions to deliver peace, freedom and security within the Middle East. I think the steps taken by the United Kingdom Government have been welcome. I've set out in my statement where I believe they should go further, but where they have come, they are welcome. We are actively engaged with the UK Government on the the transport of some children from Gaza to the United Kingdom, which Scotland will play a part in providing that health care to support those children and also to support their families. And we're obviously having constructive discussions about the ability of supporting students from Gaza to come to Scotland and the United Kingdom as a consequence of the arrangements put in place. So I want us to act with as much solidarity and agreement as we can, because only by the collective endeavours of us all can we possibly apply the pressure on the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu to reverse this disastrous course and to protect the people of Gaza, because they have suffered unbearably and it must come to an end.
Ross Greer.
Israel is an apartheid state. It has occupied Palestinian land and brutalised the Palestinian people for almost 80 years. And over the last 2 years, it has systematically slaughtered the people of Gaza, a genocide. I'm glad that the Scottish Government has finally accepted the Scottish Greens' proposal to end all public funding for Israel's arms dealers. This sets an example for nations across Europe and the world to follow. But we can and we must go further. When Putin brutally and illegally invaded Ukraine, the Scottish Government rightly and immediately called on every Scottish business to sever all ties and cease all trade with Russia. Palestinian lives are worth no less than Ukrainian or Scottish lives. So will the First Minister take the opportunity this afternoon to make that same call? Will he ask every business in Scotland to join the global boycott against apartheid Israel?
First Minister.
So the comments that I've made in my statement today set out the range of interventions the Scottish Government can take, a very significant range of interventions that we can take within our power. And part of that is about the approach that we're taking on international trade, and we are making it clear that the Scottish Government will not support the development and the encouragement and the nurturing of international trade. And that is the correct approach for us to take to ensure that we are focused entirely on using our influence and our resources to ensure that this conflict is brought to an end.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, given the historic responsibility we hold in Great Britain for the desperate situation now unfolding in Palestine, both of our governments have a duty and an obligation to act, or the images of the children of Gaza should deserve to haunt us for 100 years. The people of Gaza and of Israel are now governed by regimes that operate only in their own hate-filled interests and at devastating humanitarian costs, both to the remaining Israeli hostages and to the citizens of Gaza. I am gratified to hear the First Minister talk of our support, the government's support, for the organisation Kids OR, an organisation I've hosted in this Parliament, and I welcome the announcement of 20 children that will be brought to receive NHS care here in Scotland. Can I ask the First Minister what scope there will be to expand that number, given the unfolding humanitarian disaster in that benighted land? First Minister.
Can I welcome the comments that Mr Cole-Hamilton has made, and I've visited Kids OR in Dundee. They're an organisation that has deployed medical care of an incredibly sophisticated level in very difficult and challenging circumstances, and their intervention has been very welcome. I'm glad that we're able to support them in the way that we can. I admire the organisation enormously. In relation to the provision of medical care through the National Health Service, we are working collaboratively with the United Kingdom Government on that question. Mr Cole-Hamilton will appreciate, of course, there are all sorts of visa issues and transfer issues that have to be arranged. We cannot do that unilaterally. We have to do that in cooperation with the United Kingdom Government, and I welcome the engagement that we've had with the United Kingdom Government on pursuing this issue. So the answer to his question is that we are willing to be as helpful as we can to as many families as we can, but it will be determined by that collaboration with the United Kingdom Government on the number of children and families that we can support.
Paul McLennan, to be followed by Jackson Carlow.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Over the past few months, we have seen mass starvation in Gaza, denied by the Israeli Government, bombing of hospitals and murder of innocent journalists. An estimated 63,000 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli Government. I know he agrees with me this is genocide, but should the Scottish Government be supporting a total boycott of Israeli goods, extensive sanctions on the State of Israel and a complete ban on arms sales to Israel?
First Minister.
So what I've tried to do today is to set out the range of actions that are within the powers of the Scottish Government, and I have explored this issue extensively to maximise the effectiveness of the intervention we can make because of the gravity of the situation that Mr McLennan recounts to me. And the steps that have been set out are designed to provide the maximum response we can within Scotland to the situation we face. But we will, of course, consider what other steps emerge in the fullness of time.
Jackson Carlo, to be followed by Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will understand there will be differences between us in some aspects of the actions he's outlined this afternoon. But will he join Scottish politicians of several parties who've drawn a distinction between the State of Israel and the government, the present government of Israel, and the Netanyahu administration? Israel is a democracy where at successive elections a majority have not voted in favour of Mr Netanyahu's government or some of the extreme coalition partners within it. But the conflation in terms of language to talk of the State of Israel and its prosecution of the atrocities in Gaza is one which is used by others who have a much more malign intent towards the State of Israel itself.
First Minister.
Well, I hope in my statement that I set out my absolute view that there needs to be a peaceful settlement in the Middle East in which the State of Israel and a Palestinian state can exist side by side, and they can live in peace and security in the fashion that I discussed with Mr Sawar a moment ago. I acknowledge that there is a difference between the actions of the Netanyahu government and the actions of all of the people of Israel. There is clearly a difference between those two elements, and it is important that the Netanyahu government is in command of the government of Israel. It is that government that is prosecuting the situation in Israel. It is in Gaza. That is the government that needs to be held to account. That is the government that needs to change course. And all of the actions that I'm setting out or endorsing or encouraging are designed to have that purpose.
Emma Roddick, to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've got many constituents who show up week after week to vigils and protests for Palestine, adding their voice to the many Scots who oppose the genocide happening in Gaza. I know that the Scottish Government has previously engaged with Gaza Families Reunited to lend support in pushing for the UK Government to open safe routes for those who have family already in Scotland to join that family, something that is personally affecting many of those I've met in Inverness at protests outside the townhouse. Can the First Minister give any update on this work?
First Minister.
The Scottish Government has contacted the United Kingdom Government. The Minister for Equalities wrote to the UK Government in November 2024 in relation to the Gaza Families Reunited scheme and on behalf of Gaza Families Reunited to encourage the establishment of a Gaza Family Reuniting scheme similar to the scheme that we had in place in relation to Ukraine. Now, the United Kingdom Government has not agreed to such a proposition, but I think the ongoing awfulness of the situation and the concerns of families that Emma Roddick has put to me demonstrates the need for us to continue to press for such an approach to be taken to ensure that we do all that we can to support individuals affected by this crisis.
Pauline McNeill, to be followed by George Adam.
The Palestinian people will rejoice that their national flag is over government buildings. But does the First Minister agree with me that it isn't actually a war anymore, but it's ethnic cleansing amounting to genocide with a clear intent by Israel to occupy this land? I welcome that the government will try to bring 20 children here for emergency treatment. I myself have tried to help a young girl, Lamar, who is at threat of losing her limbs if she doesn't get treatment. The big issue here is how to evacuate those Palestinians from Gaza. Can the First Minister say any more about how we're going to get those who need this emergency treatment out of Gaza to get the treatment that they so desperately need?
First Minister.
I agree with Polly McNeill that this is no longer a war. It stopped being a war a long time ago, and that the description of what is happening in Gaza as a genocide accurately describes what is going on. So I agree with her characterisation of ethnic cleansing that is underway. Polly McNeill, I know how substantially she will be acting to help the young girl that she raised with me, and she raises the very real practical difficulties, and they are tied up with the fact that we have no effective humanitarian routes of engagement in Gaza at this present moment, and that is entirely at the hand of the Israeli government. I met with representatives of UNICEF during the summer who told me of the volume of aid that is sitting literally within viewing distance of the people of Gaza, but cannot get there because of the actions of the Israeli government. So that is critical as to how international pressure and collaboration, our collaboration with the UK government, can sustain that humanitarian effort to create the corridors and the pathways to enable us to be able to support young people like the young person that Polly McNeill raises with me. So I can assure her that we are actively engaged in trying to find solutions here, but they will depend on the pressure that can be applied in the international community to create those pathways.
George Adam, to be followed by Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the First Minister comment on the number of journalists who have been killed during this conflict? It's 247. This is more than every single conflict since the First World War. So does he agree that those in the media must be allowed to continue to tell the stories and the world of what is happening in Gaza?
First Minister.
I share the concern that Mr Adam has expressed. It is important that there is open and dispassionate analysis of what is going on in Gaza. That will be an essential source of information in relation to the international criminal proceedings and the considerations of the International Court of Justice. So I mourn for the loss of all lives in the conflict. I mourn for the loss of journalists' lives because they are able to share with us the truth of what is happening. I was reminded, Presiding Officer, at an event just before the end of the recess, of a quote by the former late Presiding Officer George Reid in the debate on the Iraq War in this Parliament in 2003, where George Reid said, "The first victim of the war is truth." And that relates directly to the comment that Mr Adam has put to me. And it's important that on this occasion we remember the fine and distinguished words of one of the greatest colleagues I've ever had, George Reid, who gave us the insight into the dangers that Mr Adam raises with me today.
Ruth Maguire, to be followed by Brian Whittle.
Presiding Officer, the crimes of Israel against the Palestinian people demand concrete action from the international community, like the welcome pause in awards to arms companies outlined by the First Minister. Boycott, divestment and sanctions are a peaceful, effective way to encourage compliance with international law. Will the First Minister instruct his government to ensure they're deploying against Israel and all those profiting from the genocide every single non-violent, punitive measure at its disposal until such a time as Israel ends its brutal and violent, illegal occupation of Palestine, genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity?
First Minister.
President Officer, I've set out a package of measures in the economic, humanitarian and diplomatic space which are within my responsibilities to be able to undertake. I have explored with my ministerial colleagues extensively the range of options that are available to us, and the products of that analysis is what Parliament has before it today. I must act in a lawful fashion at all times. It is an essential obligation, as I've set out in the statement that I've given to Parliament today. So I reassure Ruth Maguire that every step I can take is being taken.
Brian Whittle, to be followed by Christine Graham.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In the earlier answer, First Minister, I heard you discuss the amount of aid that sits waiting on the border within touching distance of those civilians who need it. And I wonder if he shares my dismay at the inability of the UN and the international community to collaborate to deliver such vital supplies to the population of Gaza who so desperately need it. First Minister.
With respect, I don't think that's the problem. The problem is the fact that the organisations that I have spoken to have given me a very clear outline of the arrangements that they have in place, and they have a track record of delivering that aid. What is necessary is a safe pathway to do so. There are people who are going to some of the existing aid arrangements and are being killed when they are going to get aid. So that illustrates that it is, in certain circumstances, unsafe for people even to access aid that is managing to reach them. But what we need is safe humanitarian routes to get that aid. And the aid is there, it is close at hand, but it needs safety to get there.
Christine Graham, to be followed by Elena Whitham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. To call out the Israeli government's actions and their deadly actions in Gaza and West Bank, genocide, which I've done on many occasions in articles, is not anti-Semitic. Indeed, many in the Jewish diaspora are equally appalled. Dissent in Israel of Netanyahu's actions is suppressed. So I note the call on the UK government to prohibit the import of goods from Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. But can I suggest that the UK go further and prohibit imports from Israel itself? Devolution has its limits, but individuals like me in Scotland have not, and it is my intention to boycott those imports in the meantime.
First Minister.
As Christine Graham will know, there are, and as she recounts in her question, there are devolved and reserved responsibilities that apply on these issues. And there is a free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and Israel, which I do not think should be maintained because of the situation in Gaza. And that would relate to many of the issues that Christine Graham puts to me, and which would be resolved if we were to take a different course in the United Kingdom about that engagement with Israel on trade.
Elena Whitham, to be followed by Maurice Golden.
Like my colleague George Adam, I am very concerned about the number of journalists that have been killed in Gaza. When I graduated with a degree in journalism, I left that university building with an absolute knowledge in my heart that my job would be to go out into the world and bear witness and hold a mirror up to the world to show exactly what is happening. What we are seeing in Gaza is not collateral damage, it's a pattern. Can I ask the First Minister, will he join me in emphatically condemning these killings, and will he make urgent representations to the UK Government and international bodies to demand action to stop the killing of journalists and secure accountability from those responsible? After all, deliberate attacks against journalists during an armed conflict constitutes a war crime.
First Minister.
I could not have made the point more powerfully than Elena Whitham has made that point. And it is important, it is critical that journalists are able to share with the world what is going on in Gaza. It is essential for that very purpose of openness and truthfulness, which is to be at the heart of media reporting, but it's also important for the issues that I raised in relation to the international criminal proceedings and the work of the International Court of Justice to ensure that what is happening in Gaza is understood and part of the understanding of the suffering of the people of Gaza.
Maurice Golden, to be followed by James Dornan.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In order to aid the humanitarian effort, the Scottish Government could further activate its soft power to promote, for example, the expertise at Dundee University, notably in the areas of groundwater aquifer utilisation to support drinking water supply, as well as cutting-edge research in housing and community design for those temporarily displaced. Is this something the First Minister would consider?
First Minister.
I would be happy to consider that, and Mr Golden in his question highlights some of the great strengths that exist within the University of Dundee, of which I'm very proud, and which are an essential part of what has been deployed on other occasions in other circumstances around the world. So he makes a very good and strong point. It does come back, however, to what is the context within which those strengths could be deployed. There needs to be peace. There needs to be an approach which means those skills can be deployed safely, and that is what we are lacking just now. So therefore the necessity of there to be a peaceful outcome is absolutely critical to enable the very good suggestions that Mr Gordon makes to take their course.
And James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, given the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and other humanitarian organisations have declared that famine is taking place in Gaza and at least 158 people died of starvation during August, what steps is the Scottish Government taking further to what you made in your original comments to address this humanitarian crisis, and whilst recognising the obstruction is the responsibility of the Israeli Government and IDF, how is it pressing the UK Government to take even more urgent action, both in terms of increasing aid and in using diplomatic and political pressure to ensure that food and medical supplies can reach civilians without obstruction, particularly whilst this unforgivable, deliberate starving of children continues in the ongoing genocide in Gaza?
Always through the Chair. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the issues that Mr Dornan raises are absolutely central to this debate, and I assure him that I have used every opportunity I have in dialogue with the Prime Minister to advance this discussion with the United Kingdom Government. The Prime Minister has been entirely willing to engage on this question, and I welcome that. I have written to the Prime Minister today setting out the various propositions and proposals that I have explained to Parliament today. I would welcome further dialogue with the UK Government to try to advance these issues and to enable me to convey to the Prime Minister the sentiments of the Scottish Parliament, which will of course be debated in the debate which is about to commence, which I think are important in contributing to the thinking of the United Kingdom Government on the actions that it needs to take in this respect.
Thank you. That concludes this item of business. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change. Okay, the next item of business is debate on motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson on Palestine. I call on Angus Robertson to speak to and move the motion. Around 11 minutes. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I move the motion that stands in my name. The Scottish Government has repeatedly called for a ceasefire and the unfettered flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza since the start of this conflict. We've also condemned unreservedly Hamas's brutality in October 2023, including the murder of the Scottish Jew Bernard Cowan, and have called for all hostages to be released. Hamas must have no future in Gaza. We've called upon the United Kingdom to end all arms sales to Israel and ensure accountability for those responsible for war crimes or crimes against humanity. The First Minister has made clear that the Scottish Government shares the concern of other governments and international leaders that genocide appears to be unfolding in Gaza. And we recognise the gravity of such a conclusion. Genocide is the gravest of international crimes. Governments must act when they believe that genocide is happening. As the First Minister set out, the Ministerial Code requires the Scottish Government to follow international law and to meet international treaty obligations. Indeed, it is noteworthy that the Labour amendment today explicitly and specifically recognises the importance of international law to the question of whether support for arms companies can continue. They are right to do so, and as the First Minister set out, it is taking account of international law and the Ministerial Code that we have paused new support. It is, of course, ultimately for international courts to decide if genocide has occurred, but governments cannot wait until it is too late. History has taught us that harsh lesson. The last genocide in Europe took place in Srebrenica in 1995, it took until 2007, 12 years later, to be recognised as a genocide by the International Court of Justice. History will judge all decision makers about what we have done to react to the facts that we can all see. Doing nothing, prevaricating, or seeking to avoid difficult decisions is not an option. The International Court of Justice in January 2024 found a prima facie case that the Israeli government was committing genocide and issued provisional measures. And in May 2024, following the IDF's assault on Rafah, the court issued additional orders to halt military operations which may inflict on the Palestinians in Gaza conditions that could bring about their physical destruction in whole or in part. The alarm has been raised. Evidence is on televisions daily. Over 63,000 people, mostly women and children, have died. Famine has been declared, while thousands of truckloads of aid are blocked, and desperate Palestinians risk death trying to access the meagre supplies being distributed under gunfire by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. United Nations leaders have expressed fears of a genocide. Of course.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. Does he recognise, as I do, that the evidence for the continuing outrages perpetrated by the Netanyahu government have prompted former Likud Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to say that Netanyahu's proposals for a humanitarian city in Gaza amount to, or tantamount to, ethnic cleansing?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree with the intervention that has been made by Alec Cole-Hamilton. It is one of a number of interventions that point to the facts that we can all see. They are there for all of us to see. The question is whether we act. And the First Minister has today set out the actions that the Scottish Government is taking within our powers, but also what we expect the United Kingdom Government to do, including joining South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. The United Kingdom bears a unique historical responsibility as the former colonial power over a territory which is so bitterly contested. And the First Minister's statement sets out what the Scottish Government can do within our powers. The pause on new support for arms companies linked to genocide is effectively the Scottish Government divesting its investment exactly as the Green Amendment today calls for. It's clear that the vast majority of the actions that amendment calls for, such as sanctions, are out with our powers and are, as the amendment itself notes, for the UK Government. Presiding Officer, the motion we debate today refers simply to the need for the State of Palestine to be recognised. It is, of course, for the United Kingdom to take that decision. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that the UK would recognise the State of Palestine at the United Nations General Assembly unless the Israeli government declared a ceasefire, allowed humanitarian access, halted West Bank annexations and showed genuine commitment to peace and a two-state solution. While the Scottish Government welcomed that decision, having repeatedly called upon the United Kingdom to recognise Palestine, we are clear that recognition should not be conditional, but instead a first step towards a two-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis live peacefully side by side. Recognition is the right of every Palestinian in the occupied Palestinian territories. Presiding Officer, let's be clear. Netanyahu's government has rejected the United Kingdom's conditions. The Israeli Security Cabinet took the chilling decision to seize Gaza City, home to around 900,000 civilians, where the United Nations has declared that famine conditions exist. Israeli forces have since attacked Gaza City suburbs, killing civilians and ending humanitarian pauses. These actions directly contradict the UK's demands. On the 20th of August 2025, the Israeli government approved the massive E1 settlement project, which would likely make a two-state solution unviable. In his own words, Israeli Minister Bezalel Smotrich said, and I quote, "This reality finally buries the idea of a Palestinian state because there is nothing to recognise and no one to recognise." These chilling words will resonate through the ages. We have been warned. Presiding Officer, the UK, having authored the Balfour Declaration, bears historic responsibility to uphold the principle of equitable rights, something recognition of Palestine unconditionally would help to restore. Palestine is recognised by 147 United Nations member states, is a UN observer and accepted by the ICC as a state entity. So the UK's history imposes a moral duty. The Balfour Declaration's promise of mutual rights cannot be realised without Palestinian statehood. Presiding Officer, this must be the starting position. As well as genocide in Gaza, we see worsening in settler violence in the West Bank. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, over 1,000 settler attacks have been recorded this year alone. On Monday this week, the First Minister and I spoke to the Palestinian head of mission in London, Hussam Zomlot, and he described to the First Minister and myself in heartbreaking terms what he has witnessed recently in the West Bank. He was clear that the Israeli government's aim is to settle the entire West Bank. He described the West Bank's economic strangulation of more than 50% unemployment, of roadblocks, of Palestinian communities penned in behind walls and behind wire. This is his and nearly 3 million Palestinians' home. Can any of us imagine what it must feel like to be systematically removed from your homeland, your homes, your livelihoods destroyed, your children's futures stolen, while the international community fails to act decisively? I'd be happy to give way, of course.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank you. Is the Minister familiar with the case of Palestinian Adwa Hathleen, who was shot dead in the West Bank only a few weeks ago? And would he agree that it does look like, under this Netanyahu government, it should become a lawless state, because this man, who we've all seen if you've watched it, shot him dead, and there's not going to be a trial, there's not going to be any kind of accountability. Can we really see now that Israel is a democracy if it does not have a court system?
Cabinet Secretary.
The case that Pauline McNeill raises is shocking. What's perhaps more shocking is it's not isolated. This, unfortunately, two-tier justice or non-existent justice for Palestinians in the occupied territory is but a symptom of the wider challenge. And I acknowledge her long-standing involvement in this issue, and I thank her for raising this particular case, but I'm sure she, like me, shares the view that it is one of many, and they are all totally unacceptable. The First Minister has announced actions that the Scottish Government will take, and what we want the United Kingdom Government to do, which includes following Ireland's example of banning goods produced in illegal settlements and increasing sanctions against those who promote illegal settlements. This wave of settler violence appears to be systematic and escalating, unpunished by the Israeli government and the Israeli Defence Forces. It forces Palestinians off their land, it erases livelihoods, it erases communities and intensifies the humanitarian crisis. There's no time to waste. The UK must act now, before it is too late. I joined the First Minister in meeting representatives of Scotland's Jewish community on Monday to make clear the esteem in which they are held and the value we place on the community's contribution to our nation. They must not suffer anti-Semitism because of the actions of Netanyahu's government. Of course.
Jackson Carlo.
Can I thank him for the expression of that sentiment? He will know the extraordinary efforts that have been entered into here in Scotland, not least with the Drumlanrig Accords promoted by Edward Green and Sheikh Saeed Razawi. But he will also know, in response to the meeting he had with the First Minister of the Jewish community, that there are concerns. There are concerns that this will fuel some prejudicial action against the Jewish community here in Scotland, not least parents of Calderwood Lodge in my constituency, Scotland's only Jewish primary, world's only Jewish Catholic campus. How will he give effect to that sentiment?
Cabinet Secretary.
So Jackson Carlaw is as committed to his Jewish constituents as much as I am, representing as I do Edinburgh's synagogue, indeed the Central Mosque and the churches of our main Christian denominations. Scotland's Jewish community is a much valued part of our national life, as the First Minister has made clear, but I recognise, as do we all, how difficult things are for the Jewish community because of the hostages that Hamas holds, but also the fears that they have because of charged emotions given appalling situation being meted out to Palestinian people. So I acknowledge the point that he makes, and we all need to be mindful of that. Drawing my contributions to a close, Presiding Officer, the Israeli government's approach to delivering aid via the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has failed tragically. The Israeli authorities must immediately allow humanitarian agencies, including UNRWA, to conduct their life-saving work unimpeded and at scale. Since the conflict began, the Scottish Government has so far committed £1.3 million for Gaza and the wider Middle East, including £750,000 for UNRWA and a further £550,000 to the Disasters Emergency Committee Appeal, Mercy Corps and SCIAF, £250,000 in total in November 2024 and £300,000 total announced on the 22nd of April 2025. The First Minister announced today that the Scottish Government will provide £400,000 in funding to establish the Gaza Hopes Field Readiness Hub in Scotland, match funding significant in-kind contribution from Kids Operating Room, and this funding will unlock funds for a $15 million field hospital ready for deployment in Gaza to provide essential services. The hub, based in Dundee, can also be used to support field hospital deployments in future humanitarian crises, and we will also donate £600,000 to the UNOCHA-led humanitarian fund for the occupied Palestinian territories to provide life-saving health services, supplies and shelter for those most at risk. We've also committed to providing medical support for up to 20 injured children from Gaza and expect the first arrivals along with their families in mid-September. Presiding Officer, we are facing a defining moment in our lifetimes. As the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, said 1 month ago, we are witnessing, and I quote, the incredible destruction of an entire people. The international community must act, Scotland must act, and the United Kingdom Government's special responsibility places an unenviable but necessary burden to lead that endeavour. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much. Before calling the next speaker, just invite members who wish to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call Jackson Carlo to speak to and move Amendment 18686.3 around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Scottish Conservatives are open to supporting the motion that is before the Parliament today. It's been quite carefully drafted. One can add different interpretations to it. Whether it is to accept all of the content of the Scottish Government or not is a separate matter. We will be listening with care to the way in which the debate is conducted this afternoon, and obviously in relation to any other amendments that might be passed. Presiding Officer, the Chamber is once again debating the Middle East, a region too often characterised by tragedy, and today by the conflict in Gaza. And we remember that we are not speaking in abstract terms, but of human lives, of Israeli families who live under the terror of rocket fire, and of Palestinian families trapped between the cruelty of Hamas and the failure of international institutions to protect them. Every statistic we hear represents men, women and children whose lives have been torn apart, and far too many of those statistics are the lives of men, women and children in Gaza. Let me be absolutely clear in the context of the unfolding of this event that Israel, like any sovereign nation, had the right, indeed the duty, to defend its citizens. Hamas is not a government. It is not a liberation movement. It is, as Anna Sauer, I think, recognised, a terror, and no responsible state could have sat idly by in the face of such atrocities. And we should also reflect, as I posed in the question to the First Minister, on the language used to describe this conflict. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it was rightly called Putin's invasion of Ukraine. When Iraq was invaded, it was spoken of as Saddam Hussein's war against Kuwait on other people. But when Israel is attacked and forced to respond, it is too often referred to as Israel's war. And rightly or wrongly, that phrase implies, for many, particularly the Jewish community, that an entire people, the Jewish people, are responsible for the decisions of their government. And that's a dangerous double standard. Yes, of course. Well, Maggie Chapman.
Maggie Chapman.
I'm grateful to Jackson Carlo for taking my intervention. He talks about the right of the Israeli state to act. Does he also agree that, given it is an occupying force, it has responsibilities under international law to allow food, to allow aid, to allow other support, to allow daily life to go on in the occupied territories, something that has systematically failed to do, not just for 2 years, but for decades?
Jackson Carlo.
Yes, I agree with, I think, the substance of Ms Chapman's point, and I'll return to it in my own remarks. But Christine Graham, yes.
Christine Graham.
to assure Jackson Carlo, every time I've written very often about this, I have made it plain that Hamas's actions were atrocious and that it is Netanyahu's actions, not the Israeli people, who are at fault. Just to assure you that those of us who are writing about it do make that distinction very loud and clear.
Jackson Carlo.
Unfortunately, that is not necessarily generally and commonly the place. In fact, we talk about Hamas's atrocity in Israel, not Gaza's atrocity in Israel. The parallel there is to be seen. It is not the Jewish people who are responsible for the decisions of their government, and it's a dangerous double standard, one that blurs the line between legitimate criticism of government policy and the prejudice of anti-Semitism that some will exploit. And we just have to be vigilant against that distinction being erased. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his remarks in the speech as he paid tribute to the Jewish community in this country and directly addressed the fears they had. But Hamas's evil doesn't just stop there. It embeds itself among the very civilians it claims to represent. It launched rockets from schools, hiding weapons in hospitals, and stored explosives beneath homes. It's turned the people of Gaza into human shields. The suffering of civilians in Gaza is real, but the moral responsibility is not only that directed at Israel, but first and foremost with Hamas. Some blame Israel for the shortage of aid. I've heard that said, and I think there are arguments that do legitimately need to be explored. But the reality is more complex and more damning of the international system. Israel has opened border crossings. Convoys are ready. Yet food and medicine too often sit idle because the United Nations refuses Israeli escorts to guarantee safe passage from looting. And we know that reports suggest that as much as 88% of aid was intercepted. And what does get through is then often stolen by Hamas, diverted away from the children and families who need it most. Let me be absolute. This is not a shortage just caused by Israel's blockade, but by Hamas's brutality and the inaction of the United Nations. It is the innocent who pay the price. Now, Britain must intervention. I think I'm going to have to make some progress, but I will be closing for our side as well, and I will take as many questions as I can at that point, as I have no written remarks prepared. Britain must speak with both clarity and compassion. Yet if we are to speak seriously about peace, we must look beyond Gaza, because Hamas does not act alone. Behind Hamas, behind Hezbollah in Lebanon, behind the Houthis in Yemen, stands the same hand: Tehran. Iran has spent decades arming, funding and directing a network of proxies. It thrives on conflict and instability, exporting chaos to entrench its own dictatorship. Every rocket fired into Israel, every drone launched across borders, bears the fingerprints of the Iranian regime. And that means pressing the United Nations for action there too. It means working with allies to stop Iran's weapons flowing into the region. And it means refusing to let those who seek to delegitimise Israel dominate the narrative. Compassion for the innocent does not weaken our resolve. That's why Britain, Scotland cannot afford to be naive. This is not simply about territory or religion. It's a struggle between a democratic state, with a government with whom people may have issues, seeking peace, and a terror network fuelled by an authoritarian regime that despises peace. If we are serious about stability, we must be serious about countering Iran's malign influence diplomatically, economically, where necessary, alongside our allies. Presiding Officer, in this chamber we may differ on emphasis, but we should not differ on the principle. Israel has the right to live free from terror. Palestinians have the right to live free from fear and in peace, and in a state that can be recognised. And Britain has the responsibility to stand always on the side of peace, security and the rule of law. That means solidarity with our allies. It means compassion for civilians caught in the crossfire, and it means confronting those powers that profit from endless war. This conflict should remind us of a simple truth. The values we cherish, democracy, security, the sanctity of human life, are not defended by words alone, but by resolve. And our resolve must be clear. We stand for Israel's right to exist. We stand for peace and a renewal of hope for all the Palestinian people. And we stand against those from Hamas to Tehran who would see both destroyed. That is the moral duty of our nation. That is the path to a future worthy of the peoples of the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Carlow. I now call on Neil Bibby to speak to and to move Amendment 18686.2. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to move the amendment in my name and to make clear the Government's unamended motion today is also in our name. We support the immediate recognition of the State of Palestine. Today I want to speak of one people, humanity, not two. One set of values, justice, before we talk of two-state solutions. One goal, peace, before we apportion names to crimes in Gaza and the West Bank, where there have been so many, by so many. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is a verse from the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, which is shared by Christian and Jew. It is also a verse in the Quran. It is not, as some might think, an encouragement to violence. It was instead an exhortation to limit it, for retaliation to be proportionate, to end the code of vengeance that called for an eye for an eyelash. No one who calls themselves part of humanity can say that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not breached that living text shared in his response to the indefensible atrocities of Hamas. Yes, Israel had the right, the duty to defend itself after Hamas had murdered and kidnapped its children. But the Israeli Prime Minister does not have the right to slaughter. He's turned the clock back rather than build a new future for his nation and his region. And the peace of Israel depends on the peace of Palestine. In response to Jackson Carter, I believe Netanyahu represents his government, his coalition perhaps, but not the Israeli people. And we almost acknowledge that, particularly in our own communities, where our protests cannot be allowed to sow division. My leader, my friend Anas Sarwar, called the recent actions of the Israeli government genocide. I agree. Other colleagues have talked of war crimes. I do not demur. I'll take an intervention from Mr Youssef.
Hamza Youssef.
Neil Bibby for his contribution so far. And just on that very point, I also welcomed Anas Sarwar's statement that a genocide is taking place. David Lammy called it a moral outrage. Keir Starmer called it horrifying. Assuming that Neil Bibby agrees with his colleagues, how on earth then can it be justified to sell one single arm, weapon or F-35 component to the very country and regime that is committing that moral outrage, that horrifying situation, that genocide?
Neil Bibby.
I thank Mr Youssef for that intervention, and I respect his passion and his campaigning on this issue. The UK Government, he'll be aware, has restricted arms sales. We have called for the Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise to look at what we can do in a Scottish context, and it does need to be under constant review, and we do need to take all the action that we can take to stop these crimes from happening, because, as Mr Youssef will be aware, the killing is still ongoing and the killing needs to stop. And while there needs to be accountability, our priority must be to call for an end to those crimes now, to stop the killings with the bullets and bombs, and the killings by the barriers that prevent food getting to children's mouths and medicines to people's wounds. In biblical times, famine was seen as a matter of weather or the will of God. Today, the famine in Gaza is man-made on the edict of Benjamin Netanyahu. It must be lifted. That is why, across this chamber, with people across this land, our continent and the globe, we have called for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages and the free flow of humanitarian aid. But the question we have as Scottish parliamentarians is what we can do. The Scottish Labour Party has argued for more than half a century for a two-state solution, and I recognise other parties have long supported that too. Statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people, and alongside a wider settlement, it is the only way for a lasting peace to be secured between Israel and Palestine. I believe every member in this place wants an end to the killing and a lasting peace. We may not all agree on the appropriate time to recognise the State of Palestine, but I believe that time is now. We may also not agree on what other actions should be taken to bring about that peace, but any action needs to be effective, involve international pressure and cooperation, and be under constant review. Important actions are already being taken by the UK Government, as set out in my amendment, in relation to restoring funding for UNRWA and respecting the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. And action is being taken by the Scottish Government too. That is welcome. While on these islands we cannot end the killing in the Gaza and the West Bank alone, we can help to make a difference by how we act and how we speak. Today, we can further help to make a difference by clearly and immediately signalling our support for the recognition of the State of Palestine. Today, let's send out a message clearly that we believe in peace, that we believe in a two-state solution. That does not mean we need to take sides other than to be on the side of those who wish to live against those who wish to take life, those who seek to make peace against those who seek conflict. Let us speak of solidarity for peace, for a ceasefire, for a two-state solution, as we have always argued. But let us argue not for division for our own ends, but for the peace for the ends who suffer for no reason.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. I now call Patrick Harvey to speak to and to move Amendment 18686.1. Up to 4 minutes, please.
I move the amendment in my name, Presiding Officer, and I welcome this opportunity for Parliament to endorse the recognition of Palestine. It's over 50 years since the United Nations recognised the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and sovereignty. Over those 5 decades, the failure of the international community to make that right a reality is one of the greatest injustices in modern world history. And the urgency is clear for anybody who can bring themselves to look. For generations, Palestinians have endured a brutal occupation. And for almost 2 years now, they've been subjected to war crimes on a grotesque scale. And the weight of legal opinion is absolutely clear. This is genocide. The recent resolution of the International Association of Genocide Scholars is one example, setting out that the actions of the Israeli government against Palestinians have included torture, arbitrary detention, sexual and reproductive violence, deliberate attacks on medical professionals, humanitarian aid workers and journalists, and the deliberate deprivation of food, water, medicine and electricity. And they also set out the very explicit statements of intent which are genocidal in nature from senior members of the Israeli government. So it's unquestionable now that to achieve justice for Palestine, action must be taken. And there is action Scotland can take. During recess, my colleague Ross Greer wrote to the Scottish Government to set out the actions they can and should take now for boycotts, divestment and sanctions. Actions which don't rely on waiting for permission from the UK Government, such as disapplying part of the Local Government Act, allowing councils to boycott companies complicit in the occupation, calling for public pension funds to divest from complicit companies, urging businesses to cease trading with Israel, exactly as the Scottish Government did in relation to Russia, and to stop giving public monies to arms dealers who have supplied Israel. I very warmly welcome the announcement today that some of these steps will be taken. We will continue to press for others. The UK Government should do the same and can do far more. The UK talks of the right of Israel to defend itself, but says nothing about the right of Palestinians to resist occupation. And Labour's amendment for today's debate recognises some positive steps, so we won't oppose it. But it takes too much credit for half measures, and it's a reminder of just how lacking the UK Government's response has been. Respecting the ICC is an important principle, but there are those, including the Prime Minister, who have used this as an excuse for not describing the situation as genocide. Obviously, we support restoration of UNRWA funding, but arms export restrictions have been extremely limited, and the UK has continued to provide other forms of practical and political support to the Israeli government. Sanctions on Israeli ministers are welcome, but the UK hasn't taken any steps against UK citizens who have travelled to Israel, fought for the IDF, killed a few Palestinians and returned home to face no legal consequences. And calling for a ceasefire, aid, hostage release and a two-state settlement, saying this is the easy bit. But the Labour government have not used the international voice of the UK to condemn the United States and Trump's explicit proposals for ethnic cleansing. Presiding Officer, this issue does not stop with state recognition. There is further action the international community must take, including coordinated international sanctions. The world must work together to deliver what it voted for at the UN those 50 years ago, the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, national independence and sovereignty in Palestine. And the Palestinian state which emerges must have global support to rebuild what Israel's violence has destroyed and robust security guarantees against future incursion, invasion or occupation. Recognition of the state is long overdue, but it is only the first step toward justice for Palestine.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. And I now call on Alex Hamilton. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm very grateful to the Scottish Government for making time for this very, very important debate. It's a debate which takes place against the backdrop of immense humanitarian suffering and our historic culpability, something I raised with the First Minister in the statement earlier. In Gaza, what families are enduring is nothing short of a catastrophe. Thousands of civilians killed, millions have been displaced, and basic necessities like food, water and medicine desperately scarce. There is a famine raging through that land. Those images of starving children should be burned into the retinas of all of our eyes. At the same time, Israeli families still wait in agony for the return of their loved ones taken hostage by Hamas terrorists in the atrocities of October 7th. We must never lose sight of either tragedy. Both demand urgent action. I echo those who say that a Palestinian life is worth as much as an Israeli life. Presiding Officer, it is incumbent on all of us in that spirit to remember, to think, to speak and to act on behalf of all those Israelis in whose name Netanyahu does not act, and those Palestinians whom Hamas does not represent. The motion before us speaks to the recognition of a Palestinian state. For the Liberal Democrats, recognition is not an abstract gesture. It is a vital, practical step towards peace and towards a two-state solution that ensures dignity and security for both Palestinians and for Israelis. The Prime Minister has finally announced that the UK will recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly later this month. We have heard that, unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and allows aid into Gaza, amongst other conditions. That marks some progress. We accept that, and Liberal Democrats welcome it. But the Prime Minister can go much further. Liberal Democrats are in no doubt that the actions of the Israeli cabinet, of the IDF, are in breach of international law. We have repeatedly called on the government to go further in imposing a full arms embargo, sanctioning all members of the cabinet, including Netanyahu, who are complicit in the illegal aid blockade and the targeting of civilians, and supporting the gathering evidence for future accountability of these crimes against humanity. Presiding Officer, recognition should have happened months ago, and by doing it in the way the Prime Minister is intending to, we are treating recognition as some kind of bargaining chip. 147 of the United Nations 193 member states already recognise Palestine. Countries like France and Canada are moving in that direction too. If Britain believes in rules-based international order, and we should do, then we should be part of that majority. We should recognise Palestine immediately, and in so doing give renewed momentum to the cause of peace. Recognition affirms the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, a right they have long been denied. And recognition would be more than just symbolic. It would allow full diplomatic relations, a Palestinian ambassador in London and a British ambassador in Palestine. That would help build the trust needed to advance peace. Recognition for Palestine is one of the most effective ways of disempowering Hamas as well, because it makes clear that the future of Palestine belongs not to the terrorists, but to the Democrats, to peace builders and to those committed to that two-state solution, something Hamas has no interest in. Hamas do not represent the Palestinian people. They have no genuine interest in a Palestinian state, and they have no future in the governance of Gaza or the West Bank. Recognition is not a reward for Hamas. It is a rejection of them. But recognition alone is not enough. We need urgent action to stop the humanitarian disaster we are all seeing in Gaza. That means pressing for an immediate ceasefire, ensuring aid flows freely, and the use of every diplomatic lever to secure the unconditional release of the remaining Israeli hostages. It means Britain going further than the Prime Minister's limited plan. We must end arms sales to Israel and apply targeted sanctions against members of the Israeli cabinet responsible for violations of international law. At the same time, we must work with international partners to identify and support democratic leaders of Palestine and to prepare for swift elections that can unite Gaza and the West Bank under one legitimate representative government. Only then can a Palestinian state be stable and enduring, and we must invest in that peace. The International Fund for Middle East Peace, supported by my party, is one way to bring together communities across the divide.
Mr Hamilton, you need to conclude.
The road to peace is long, It will not be easy, but recognition of a Palestinian state is an essential step along it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hamilton. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Paul McLennan to be followed by Brian Whittle. Mr McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Saturday morning, I attended a Gaza protest event in Harrington in my constituency. Around 200 people were present. Last night, I attended an event in North Berwick, which was attended by around about 75 people. In both events, people from all backgrounds were present. They were angry, distraught and frustrated at the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And let's call this what it is. It's state-sponsored genocide. An estimated 63,000 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli government. This figure rises every day. I want to put on record my condemnation of Hamas actions on October 7th, 2023. We all do. Famine is being used as a weapon by Israel in this war. The facts of the famine are simple in Gaza. Palestinians can't leave. War has ended famine, and Israel has banned fishing. So practically every calorie its population eats must be brought in from outside. Israel knows how much food it is needed. It has been calibrating hunger in Gaza for decades. COGAT, the Israeli agency that still controls aid shipments to Gaza, calculated that Palestinians need an average minimum 2,279 calories per person per day, which could be provided through 1.836 kilograms of food. Today, humanitarian organisations are asking for an even smaller amount in minimum ration to keep people alive, 62,000 metric tonnes of dry and canned food to meet basic needs for 2.1 million people each month, or around about 1 kilogram of food per person per day. Gaza has slid into famine this summer. Israeli officials have vigorously denied the existence of mass starvation, claimed without evidence that food has been stolen or hoarded, or blamed hunger on UN distribution failures, sharing pictures of aid pallets awaiting collection inside the border. Data compiled and published by Israel's own government makes clear that it has been starving Gaza. Between March and June, Israel allowed just 56,000 tonnes of food to enter Gaza. COGAT records show less than a quarter of Gaza's minimum needs for that period are being provided. UN-backed food security experts recently said a worst-case scenario of famine is now unfolding in Gaza. Food deliveries, and I quote, are at a scale far below what is needed, amid drastic restrictions on the entry of supplies. In response, Netanyahu has promised only minimal extra aid. The number of food trucks entering the territory has risen, but is still well below the minimum needed to feed Palestinians there, much less reverse a famine. Gaza's Ministry of Health says that more than 15,000 of the 60,000 Palestinians killed are children. Israel says that it seeks to minimise harm to civilians. The children of Gaza have the same rights as children anywhere: to water, to food, to shelter, to education, to play, to hope, to joy, and most importantly, to life. We've seen hospitals bombed and described as mistakes. We've seen journalists killed, again described as mistakes. Since October 2023, many hospitals and healthcare facilities in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed by Israeli strikes and military operations. According to a May 2025 report from the World Health Organization, 94% of Gaza's 36 hospitals have been damaged or destroyed. Attacking hospitals, medical staff and the sick is considered a war crime under the 1949 Geneva War Conventions, which Israel has signed. Attacking hospitals in Gaza have also drawn condemnation from the UN, the World Health Organization and other international bodies. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, this is a state-sponsored genocide. I welcome the commitment to recognising Palestine. The Scottish Government also needs to support a total boycott of Israeli goods, and it needs to support and pressure the UK Government to impose sanctions on the State of Israel, not just on selected officials, but on the State of Israel, and of course a complete ban on arms sales to Israel. This genocide needs to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McLennan. I now call Brian Whittle to be followed by George Adam. Mr Whittle.
Presiding Officer, I have said in this chamber before that if we take away the issues that we create to divide us, colour, creed, religion, sexual orientation, people the world over are the same. We want the same basic things. We want a happy childhood, we want to spend time with friends, we want a good education, we want to be immersed in our community, we want a decent living, we want to meet somebody, we want to have a family, we want to live in peace without fear. And we all grieve loss. However, it is those who propose to exert power, ideology and control that create division, hatred and violence. Today we are debating the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and it is a humanitarian crisis. But in recent times, we could be talking of atrocities in Rwanda, in Mariupol, in Srebrenica and Aleppo, in Bosnia and Sudan, in Syria and Ukraine and Afghanistan. And it's always in these conflicts, it is the civilians who bear the brunt of politicians and religious leaders' misplaced ideology. On October the 7th, 2023, Hamas fighters launched their assault on Israel, indiscriminately killing 1,200 Israelis in the most brutal and sickening ways. I was on a call with other MSPs, some of who are in the chamber today, when we were unexpectedly shown footage from the body cams taken from the terrorists. Now, I know I wasn't the only one unprepared for the level of brutality heaped upon the most innocent of people, and I can't ever unsee that. And what about the footage of those terrorists beating and abusing that young German woman, the only woman, incidentally, seen in all of that coverage? She died the most horrendous death. The 251 hostages taken by Hamas as bargaining chips and human shields against every humanitarian law you may wish to mention. We must never lose sight of that, and under no circumstances can Hamas in any way profit from their actions or be held to account. Nor can the Houthis or Hezbollah or the Iranian government, for that matter. They have all stated categorically that they wish the purging of all Israelis, the very definition of genocide. I will.
Ivan McKee.
We all share the members' reflections on the events of October the 7th, and the First Minister has been very clear about that in his statement. But does the member believe that that justifies genocide by the Israeli government?
Brian Whitham.
The member preempts what I was just about to say. I think the world, presiding officer, was outraged at that atrocity and most supported Israel's right to defend itself. After all, the safety of a country and its people is the first duty of any government. And acknowledging their right to attempt to retrieve their citizens and supporting their right to defend themselves, the world asked for restraint. We asked for the Israeli government to protect the innocent. Netanyahu has pursued a war that in no way protects the citizens of Gaza. Hamas may have committed the most brutal of atrocities, but one atrocity does not justify another, and Netanyahu must be held to account. But as I raised with the First Minister, what I can't get my head around is why are supplies not getting through to the people who desperately need them. There is no shortage, after all. Both sides may blame each other, and there is no doubt in my mind that Hamas are intercepting supplies where they can and diverting them, because their actions, we can safely surmise, they care little for the Palestinian people.
The member is concluding.
My question would be, where are the UN in all of this? It cannot be out with their ability to ensure supplies get to where they're needed. They have shown themselves to be toothless and useless. What I say here is that Netanyahu is not Israel and Hamas is not Palestine. Both civilian populations have spoken out against their respective leaders. To close, I do not excuse the actions that have been taken, nor do I condone the choices that have been made. But there can be no lasting peace until both sides are willing to face up to the consequences of their actions and accept that neither side has a monopoly on the moral high ground, and while neither the Israeli government nor Hamas can claim to be innocent victims, their choices have created many among their citizens. Presiding officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I would remind members that backbench speeches are up to 4 minutes. I call George Adam to be followed by Katie Clark. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, when you were having this debate and making this speech, it's a difficult and emotional speech for me. I'm an emotional person, as we all know, and my first thoughts were to go down that route. But after listening to Jackson Carlo and listening to how he put his point of view across, I disagreed with much of what he said, but I'm glad it was Jackson Carlo for the Conservatives that was bringing forward that point of view, because I don't think it would have been handled as well with any of your other colleagues. But I'm aware how difficult peace in the Middle East is. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I also believe that Scotland's voice has to be heard in this. It's right that Scotland's Parliament should discuss this issue. There's also the inhumanity of what Hamas did in October 2023 to take into account. However, Presiding Officer, there comes a time, regardless of your own views, regardless of your politics, when you say enough is enough. This genocide in Gaza has to end. Earlier today, I mentioned the targeting of 247 journalists during this conflict, and we must understand how wrong this is. Presiding Officer, this debate is not just politics for me. The plight of the people of Palestine has been a major issue for me for a very long time. I've been demonstrating in the streets for Palestine for decades, and I remember taking my children to demonstrations when they were young. Jessica and James loved the colour of the spectacle, but they grew up with the chance for justice in their ears, flags in their hands, and understanding that silence in the face of injustice is never an option. Now they've got their own children, and yet we are still shouting, still marching, and still demanding the very same things. Presiding Officer, over 63,000 people, women, men, children, gone, wiped out by bombs, bullets, and now by hunger. Families slaughtered while queuing for food. Presiding Officer, let me say that again. Families slaughtered while queuing for food. Parents in Gaza have been forced to choose between their children starving to death or being shot trying to find a loaf of bread. That's not defence, that's barbarity. In Paisley, through Paisley for Palestine, they have kept the struggle alive in our community. They've marched, they've held vigils, they've stood shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinian people. One of the most powerful moments was when they did a presentation of Gaza's doctors under attack. That film lays it bare. Doctors, the very people trying to save lives, being deliberately targeted. That's not random. That's a systematic attack on the professional classes of Palestine, because if you kill the doctors, the teachers, the lawyers, then you make statehood harder. But even worse, you crush hope itself. And that, colleagues, is unforgivable. That's why recognition of Palestine is so important. It's not a gift to be handed out. It must be recognition that is unconditional and irreversible. It must come with consequences for those who have continued this horror. More than 140 countries, Presiding Officer, including Ireland, Norway, Spain and Slovenia, have recognised Palestine, yet the UK still drags its feet. Keir Starmer talks about recognition, then ties it to conditions dictated by the very state starving children in Gaza. That's shameful and that's weak. Presiding Officer, over 63,000 lives have been lost. Women, children, starved, bombed and buried while the world looks on. Recognition of Palestine is not charity, it's justice. Ceasefire now, stop the arms sales and recognise Palestine as a state unconditionally and irreversibly. No more excuses, no more delays. Palestine must be free and Scotland stands with them.
Thank you, Mr Adam. I now call Katie Clark to be followed by Bill Kidd. Ms Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome that this motion has been brought by the Scottish Government, that this debate is taking place in government time, and a statement from the First Minister. I appreciate there are those who say that this Parliament should not be debating international issues, but I believe that it is right that we're having this debate as it affects all of us, our security, and we cannot stay silent as we watch the carnage and the multiple breaches of international law. The main argument against the Scottish Government's position seems to be that now is not the time. But given the slaughter that we've all seen, now is the time. And in fact, we should have recognised Palestine many years ago. The UK Government, the UK Parliament voted in favour of recognition of the Palestinian state in 2014 in a non-binding vote. But successive UK governments have failed to recognise Palestine. As the Cabinet Secretary and Alex Cole-Hamilton said, the state of Palestine has been recognised by 147 of the 193 member states of the UN, and it has been a non-member observer state since 2012. As Anna Sarwar said earlier, recently, France, Australia, Canada and the UK stated their intention to recognise Palestine by September 2025, this month. This debate is therefore timely, and I urge the UK Government to recognise the state of Palestine without condition. The backdrop, of course, is the extensive media coverage of human suffering, the mutilation and slaughter of children, the levelling of Gaza and destruction of infrastructure, starvation, famine and a blockade. Nobody can say they are not aware of the human misery. Since the horrific events of 7 October 2023, there have been at least 20 UN votes expressing concerns and condemnation of Israel's actions, and for a ceasefire and for self-determination of the Palestinian people. But Israel is not listening. Israel annexed land by force in 1948 and 1967. Illegal Israeli settlements have been built on Palestinian land since 1967, and the Israeli state has a formal system of legalised discrimination against Palestinian people. Over the last 2 years, there have been some of the highest known death tolls amongst journalists, health and humanitarian workers and UN staff. Hundreds of Palestinians have been detained and subject to arbitrary detention in the West Bank. Children in Gaza have faced the brunt of the war. Thousands of children have been killed and many more are living with life-changing injuries. There are verified reports of children dying from starvation and disease. I say to this Parliament today, any plan for peace must include Palestinian voices. I hope the political groupings come together. It would be disappointing if the vote today is not unanimous. The Scottish Parliament must support the Palestinians and must support recognition today.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I now call Bill Kidd to be followed by Hamza Youssef. Mr Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I wholeheartedly voice my support for today's motion, while at the same time rejecting those voices that would seek to silence Scotland's right to speak on such important issues. Such voices echo hollow and hypocrisy. On the one hand, calling for the vocal condemnation of the atrocities of 7th of October 2023, a condemnation that I have repeatedly made and do so again today, while on the other hand, they call for silence on the atrocities we have witnessed since. I agree with the sentiment that words alone are no longer enough, and I believe that almost 2 years on it is indeed time for action. The UK Government must, without delay, put its words into practice and recognise the state of Palestine. Despite some opinions to the contrary, I believe and I hope that Scotland can play a meaningful role in furthering efforts to achieve a lasting and just peace between Palestinians and Israelis. Only this Monday, as part of the Scotland Forum 2025, which promotes international cooperation and understanding, Scotland welcomed elected representatives from across the Nordic nations. We gave them the time, the space and the opportunity to discuss and agree upon a joint position on the question of Israel and Palestine. The resulting Nordic Declaration on Israel and Palestine, adopted in Edinburgh this week, calls upon all governments to recognise the state of Palestine. This historic declaration, the first joint declaration between the Nordic states, will, I understand, be published this week and be open for all parliamentarians to support. I will happily share it with colleagues across this chamber. The declaration also calls for the restoration of the two-state solution to the centre of the international agenda. The two-state solution is not only central to, but essential to a just peace for all parties, not only for Palestinians, but also for Israelis. Yet I feel it is much misunderstood in today's world. Many see it as simply entrenching division through the creation of hard borders between two nations. Nothing could be further from the truth. The proposal envisages an interim period during which negotiations on final status would take place. At that point, there would be no hard borders, but instead a joint administrative body, something more akin, in my mind, to a confederation of cooperation and shared interests. So let's be clear. The proposal and its specifics have already been comprehensively explored and documented. This is not an embryonic idea. It is ready for implementation down to the smallest of details. It leaves us with a two-state solution. And that brings me to what I believe is central and recurring theme in this debate: education. If we are to form opinions and make informed decisions, education is key. Too often young people, and indeed many of us, including Israelis and Palestinians, feel helpless, believing the situation to be intractable. This leads to hopelessness, when in fact there is a justified hope. I understand that steps here in Scotland to provide schools with materials on the wider content of the situation have been stalled, and I would urge the Cabinet Secretary and indeed the Scottish Government to take steps to remedy this impasse and to inform and offer hope to our young people. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, action must now be taken. I urge the UK Government to follow through on its promises, and I believe that Scotland can play our important role by facilitating dialogue, bringing together diverse voices and providing the space for them to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. I now call Hamza Yousaf to be followed by Cara Mockin. Mr Yousaf.
Never again. These are the words we repeat every single year when we attend Holocaust Memorial Day. We rightly gather and promise to honour the memories of the 6 million Jews and all of those killed during the evil of the Holocaust. Never again, we say. I'm not sure if in the annals of human history we've ever told ourselves a bigger lie. Try telling the parents of 17,000 children murdered in Gaza, never again. Look into the eyes of tens of thousands of children who have become orphans and tell them that we really meant it when we said never again. Hospital workers, journalists, aid workers, all massacred with absolute impunity, tell their families never again. So awful is the genocide that we are witnessing. We're having to create new lexicon just to describe the horrors that we are witnessing. Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, a Canadian paediatrician who's worked in Gaza, tells us that doctors had to create a new abbreviation for the children they were treating. WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. What has become of us that we can allow ourselves to be so divided by the geopolitics when a massacre of tens of thousands of children is happening in front of our very eyes and the world does virtually nothing about it? Shame on us. Gaza is the cemetery upon which our collective humanity has died. Presiding Officer, we should be in no doubt about what we're witnessing. It is a genocide. This is the opinion of the world leading authority on genocide, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, who have declared that Israel's conduct meets the legal definition of genocide. They're not the only ones, of course. Amnesty International, MSF, Oxfam, Israeli human rights organisations such as B'Tselem, and many more voices of authority tell us that genocide is taking place in Gaza. Predictably, one of the most vocal voices that opposes that suggestion is the very man that's wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Presiding Officer, it's been to my astonishment over the last 48 hours that some members in this chamber are of the view that we should not be having this debate in our nation's parliament. It was never, by the way, an argument they made when we debated Ukraine, of course, and I do wonder why Palestinian lives matter less. They've said in their arguments in the last couple of days that foreign affairs are reserved to the government in London. To them I ask, is your compassion reserved? Is your humanity reserved? We have an absolute obligation in this place to tell the stories of those who do not have the privilege of platform that we have. And perhaps in that vein, let me end by telling the Chamber about my wife's cousin, Sally. She's in Gaza with her husband and 4 children. And as I tell her story, I want you to think of your children, of your niece, your nephew, your grandchild. Sally, her husband and 4 children are being starved When Sally hugs her children, instead of feeling a warm embrace, she feels instead their spine, their ribs protruding through their skin. They are becoming quite literally emaciated in her arms. And while they cry through the pain of not eating or drinking, she has to try to comfort them while starvation grips her body. Now imagine that was your child. Imagine your child suffering the catastrophic effects of a man-made famine while thousands of tons of food was simply across the border and you could do nothing about it. As the author Omar El-Akkad wrote, one day everybody will have been against this. So I urge members across the chamber not to wait until that day, but to examine our conscience and ensure when our children ask us, what did we do when a genocide was occurring? Then at the very least, presiding officer, we can say we were on the right side of history.
Thank you, Mr Youssef. I now call Carol Mochan to be followed by John Mason. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, presiding officer. I thank the Government for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I said in June in a previous debate, we need more serious discussion of our country's role in these conflicts and how we can alter our actions to limit the likelihood of war. But let's be honest, this has gone far beyond war. It is outright aggression on an entire population of people who have been bombarded with bombs in what, let us be frank, is a planned and targeted operation. Netanyahu's regime seeks to cleanse Gaza of its people, and there must be consequences. We cannot stand by. This chamber needs to challenge this, and I am glad the Government have brought this debate to the chamber today in government time. I welcome the opportunity to speak to the motion and the amendments. It is our duty to speak out, expose what is happening, and hope it ultimately makes some difference to those suffering an unimaginable life. I receive constituent correspondence every single day, in every form you can imagine, about this issue. Scots are disgusted by what they are seeing, and they only see a fraction of what has gone on. We can be sure of this, as journalists have been stopped from entering the besieged strip, and those already there have faced starvation, severe malnutrition, deliberate targeting, and ultimately death. A sombre thought about brave people who merely seek to tell the truth to the rest of the world. I believe it is my duty to be clear about these crimes and to push all governments to take action so that those who elected me know their voice is being heard in the Scottish Parliament. Our constituents expect governments to take action, peaceful action which creates consequences for this regime. Failure to act makes us complicit, and it is to my eternal shame that many people in positions of power have been slow to act and taken a route of simply saying as little as possible. I am well aware of just how impotent we are to stop the genocide stop this genocide as MSPs, but that should not mean we fail to use every ounce of influence we have to make it clear that these atrocities are not in our name. I support the actions of the UK Government laid out in the Scottish Labour Amendment. I want the UK Government to be robust in its approach, and I will continue to lobby them, as many with my own party and others do, to urge them to do more. A Palestinian state must be recognised without condition. In Scotland, we need to be assured that no public money is reaching arms parts that may reach Gaza, and the Scottish Government must continue to track that money, and I welcome the statement from the First Minister today. To close, presiding officer, we must use every opportunity to strive for peace, and that can only hope to be achieved once Palestine has the same recognition all sovereign states should have. Palestinians have the right to statehood, to a life free from fear, but at the moment many simply need food and clean water. What does that say about humanity? There is no war left to fight. Gaza is destroyed. The West Bank has once again been turned into an open-air prison. All of us have seen the images of babies and mothers emaciated and on the brink of death. How much longer must this go on? History has its eyes on us. This conflict must end, and we must all play our part in ensuring this happens now. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mockin. And I call John Mason. Mr Mason.
Thank you very much. War is seldom the best way of solving problems, and there have undoubtedly been far too many deaths in all three of the current major conflicts in Ukraine, in Sudan and in Gaza. However, to say that any of these three amounts to genocide, I consider as a step too far and does not help resolve the present situation. Apart from anything else, genocide requires intent, and I do not see evidence of intent on Israel's part to destroy the population of Gaza. Where we do see intent to commit genocide is when people use phrases like "from the river to the sea," which implies genocide with the removal of all Jews from Israel. What I think we do need is a longer-term plan, and we need peacemakers. It seems to me that if we could get all parties to agree on a longer-term plan, even if only in broad outline, be that a two-state solution or something else. No, I'm sorry, I've only got 4 minutes. Be that a two-state solution or something else, then it might be easier to achieve short-term improvements, such as the release of the hostages and a ceasefire. Essential to this is that all parties must accept each other's right to exist, and that includes Iran and Hamas, or any replacement for Hamas that Iran puts in place, recognising Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. The UN is often known for peacekeeping, with, I fear, mixed success historically. However, what we are needing to see now is peacemakers rather than peacekeepers. We desperately need international statesmen like former President Jimmy Carter, who would be respected by all parties and who might seek common ground and a space for compromise. That is the role I would like to see the UK or Scotland playing. We have plenty of people cheering on either side, and we do not really need any more of that. And Norway has shown in the past what could be done by even a small country by way of moving negotiations along. The present Israeli government faces considerable opposition within Israel, not least from those who want the hostages released, and they see no real progress in that regard. I do not believe Israel can actually defeat Hamas, and even if they did, a new group backed by Iran under a new name would likely arise. I know that the situation in Northern Ireland was different. However, it showed us that however much you detest the other side, eventually you need to hold talks and negotiate. And sadly, I fear that Israel is steadily losing friends the longer this one-sided war goes on, while opposition to Israel is strengthening in Gaza, Palestine and beyond. At the Building Bridges with Israel cross-party group and elsewhere, I have asked representatives of the Israeli embassy what the aim of the Israeli government is in this conflict, but I have never had a clear answer. What I do think we all need to be doing is ensuring that we judge Israel by the same standards that we apply to other countries around the world, where we see horrendous abuse of minorities and others, by a variety of states like Afghanistan with women, China with Tibetans, Uyghur, Christians, Falun Gong, Myanmar with Muslims, and North Korea with any religious group. However, it does seem that some people hold Israel to a different standard, potentially because they are the only Jewish state. I think we have to be very careful about doing this, as both Europe and the Arab world have a long history of treating Jews as second-class citizens. We need to be careful not to repeat these historical injustices. The Scottish Government motion seeks immediate recognition of Palestine as a state. I fear that that has no real meaning in practice and does not really move us forward. However, I still think that a two-state solution is probably the best solution we can aim for. Therefore, let us see increased medical and other aid getting into Gaza, but primarily let us see both the UK and Scotland doing more to encourage, promote and help make peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mason. We now move to closing speeches, and I call on Maggie Chapman to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This afternoon's debate has not simply been a question of foreign policy, but it is to confront a question of humanity. In Gaza, tens of thousands of children, women and men have been murdered. Whole families erased. Hospitals, schools, places of worship reduced to rubble. A people systematically starved, displaced, blockaded, bombarded, subjected to collective punishment. This is not an accident of war. This is not a tragic misfortune. This is the deliberate machinery of genocide. And Scotland, whether we wish it or not, is entangled in that machinery. At least £8 million of public money has gone from Scottish enterprise into the hands of arms manufacturers, Leonardo, Raytheon and others, merchants of death that have supplied weapons and equipment used in Israel's assault on Gaza. Not a single one of them has failed the so-called human rights due diligence test. That is a damning indictment on a system that pretends neutrality while enabling atrocity. Let us be clear, we cannot wash our hands of this. Every pound of public money that supports these firms is a pound complicit in the death of a child in Gaza. Every political equivocation, every refusal to name apartheid and genocide for what they are, is complicity. So I welcome the First Minister's statement earlier today, but we must go further. This Parliament must find the courage that too many governments across the global north have lacked. We must not avert our eyes. We must not let the words catch in our throats. Apartheid, genocide. These are not rhetorical flourishes, they are legal and moral realities. We must also recognise the decades of injustice the Palestinians have faced. The recent famine, highlighted by Paul McLennan, is only the latest atrocity inflicted on a people by the Israeli state. They have suffered illegal settlements, the silencing of their politicians and journalists, the constraint of their rights, as we've heard this afternoon, for decades. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who knew apartheid in its most despicable forms, told us plainly, and I quote, "Those who continue to do business with Israel are contributing to the perpetuation of a profoundly unjust status quo." Jimmy Carter told us nearly 20 years ago that apartheid exists in Palestine in its most despicable form. They were not afraid to speak the truth. Neither should we be. George Adams said, "Silence in the face of injustice is not an option." Absolutely true. But that truth, and the truth that Tutu and Carter spoke, demands action. Not only recognition of the state of Palestine, though that is a necessary and urgent step, but real solidarity. That means not normalising a genocidal state. It means boycott, divestment, sanctions. The very tools that helped topple apartheid South Africa. The very tools that can, once again, be the instruments of justice. Because recognition without action is hollow. Words without consequences are just another betrayal. Think, colleagues, of one family in Gaza, or what used to be a family. A mother walking back through the ruins after a temporary ceasefire. She doesn't search for her home. It is gone, as is her husband. She searches instead only for the bodies of her children. That is the scale of this horror. That is what our silence, our complicity sustains. That is why people gather in Aberdeen and Dundee, in villages, towns and cities across the world. They gather in protest, not out of hate, but out of love. Love for justice, love for peace, love for life itself. Presiding Officer, we are here for accountability, for integrity, for justice, for peace. We are here for Palestine. And today I call on this Parliament to not only recognise the state of Palestine, but to stand where history demands we stand, against apartheid, against genocide, and with the global movement of boycott, divestment and sanctions. Because if we fail to act, then all of our words, all of our debates will be nothing more than whispers over graves.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call on Polly McNeill to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 6 minutes, please.
A mere walk 12 kilometres to a food distribution point, barefoot to get food for his family. He kissed the hand of an American soldier, thanking him for a bag of lentils. Then Israeli Defence Forces killed him right in front of the soldier, executed in broad daylight. He was 5 years old. The dignity of the Palestinians is unmatched in the world, and in the middle of acute famine, they still remain dignified and hopeful. A former Defence Special Officer resigned from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation because he said in his entire career he hadn't witnessed such brutality, the use of indiscriminate force against an unarmed population, including the use of quadcopters and AI-assisted killing. 6-year-old children in Gaza are planning their own funerals. Many are scared they won't die with their parents because they know they face death. Israel and its government have crossed a clear line into the darkest crimes. Death by deliberate starvation is a war crime. There is hardly a serious journalist now who doesn't accept that it's deliberate. Bombing hospitals and targeting doctors has become commonplace. Medical staff. Dr Hassam Safia has been held in Israeli jail, and his lawyer said that he's been tortured, and we don't know why. 200 journalists have been killed trying to hold Israel to account. Israel has gone to extreme lengths to prevent the world witnessing its genocide and committing multiple war crimes. And the famine is the ugliest aspect, but at least permanent damage to the population, to the health of the population, because we've perhaps reached the point of no return. Back-to-back strikes on NASA hospitals caused outrage because journalists were murdered because they found a spot on the rooftop of the hospital that had a good internet connection. Evidence shows that there were missiles directed at that spot, and a double-tap hit, which is known by those in the military to mean that you fool the victim into thinking they survived the hit only to have a bigger hit thereafter. Israel is not held to a higher standard. Israel is held to the standards of international law, and all of these things are breaches of international law. It's not a war. It is clear it's a deliberate plan to obliterate the Gaza Strip of its inhabitants, or either kill or force them to flee. The Israeli cabinet does not equate Palestinian lives to Jewish lives, openly stating their genocidal intentions. And if you've been reading this closely, you will see that even the chief of the IDF is saying to Netanyahu, we cannot do this. I mean, there are voices within the army actually trying to argue with Netanyahu, and lots of Israeli voices on their own streets saying this does not represent the Israel that they fought for. And that is the most important thing about the question of Israel's future. Humza Yousaf is quite right to talk about the impunity which Israel has been allowed in this world since the occupation started in 1967. No one really has been willing to hold Israel to account for their occupation. They are acting in contravention of international law by occupying the West Bank and putting the Gaza Strip under siege for 18 years. I have to say that if you've been also paying attention to what's happening in the West Bank, Israel's administration has made it a lawless state. I mentioned earlier to the Minister that our Hathleen is known by many people who go to Hebron because he's the one that shows people around and what Hebron is really like under occupation. Shot dead in his own land, and there'll be no accountability for this. Like Katie Clark and Neil Bibby and Carol Mockin and others, I actually believe that we owe the Palestinian people nothing less than the immediate recognition of their sovereign state, and without any conditions whatsoever. We must give the Palestinians the dignity that they deserve, to be full members of the United Nations, and I dearly hope that there can be unanimity on this tonight. I think the Scottish Parliament speaking with one voice on recognition is a very, very powerful thing, because like many other speakers, I know most of us who believe and have passionately believed that peace can only come about for Israel and for Palestinians until we settle this question. The whole region depends on settling this question, and I hope that we can ensure that the occupation comes to an end. There must be consequences for the State of Israel, and some it has already faced: suspension of trade negotiations, banning of goods imported from illegal settlements, which I think has actually been a policy for quite a long time. And actually, I think the Scottish Government statement is something I broadly support. I think it's really really good. Nothing can be off the table to prevent the genocide, to bring about compliance of international law. Patrick Harvey, in a good speech, said that the world must work together, and I don't think there's ever been a truer word. If we have to make up for the feelings that the world has made happen for the Palestinian people, then we must ensure that whatever action that we take is targeted to ensure that we can actually do something about the genocide and bring an end to the occupation. And I do actually believe the UK government should go further, and I believe in that. Close, presiding officer, and saying I actually do believe in the brave people within Israel itself who are marching and challenging their own government also need to be recognised in this debate. In conclusion, presiding officer, please, please, let this Parliament speak with one voice tonight. Let this Parliament show that Scotland and all its parties believe in justice for the Palestinians, and that we actually really believe that peace can only come about if we add our voices to all the other 147 countries now, isolating some of the big powers, I actually think will be a very powerful thing.
Thank you, Ms McNeill. And I now call on Jackson Carlisle to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, presiding officer. Can I begin with the powerful speech from Humza Yousaf? And can I say that in all the years I think we've served together in this Parliament, we've always engaged together with a mutual respect, and I hope in a way that actually is constructive in the conversations we have, irrespective of whether we agree or disagree. But I think he was right. He said never again. And in Holocaust Memorial Day speeches that I've moved in this chamber, I've said it's a conceit to say never again. Because in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Bosnia, Srebrenica, genocides have been a permanent way of the world ever since the Holocaust. And it is a failure of the international community sometimes to recognise and to put in place the structures that would actually effectively intervene and deal with these matters much earlier than it has been seen to do. And I'd also say to Humza Yousaf that I did not in my remarks, in expressing my view, deny that there should be an opportunity for this chamber to participate in this debate. I recognise the strong feelings that have been expressed, and I think the debate, although clearly there have been speeches with which I can't agree this afternoon, has actually been held in terms which are not those that I might have feared it could have been, and I'd like to thank members for that. Alex Cole-Hamilton talked about the historic perspective in all of this, and yeah, I remember debating here in 2018 as we celebrated, or commemorated rather, the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, the whole failure of the international community over 100 years to actually grapple with and resolve the issue of the Middle East and Palestine. It was implicit in the Balfour Declaration that not only would there be a state of Israel, but there would be a state of Palestine too. And that has been a failure. And it's not been a failure that's been arrived at without effort. Lots of people have made efforts, but there has sometimes been an intransigence. And the nearest I remember we got was under President Clinton, when he produced the accords that he did, and Yasser Arafat was on the verge of potentially agreeing what would have been a settlement on which a future peace could have been built. But unfortunately, he was unable to sustain the agreements that he had potentially arrived at when he arrived back in the Middle East. And so those efforts fell apart, and really for 30 years we've made no progress whatsoever. Mr Sweeney.
Paul Sweeney.
Does he recognise that a key element in the collapse of the Oslo Accords was the polarisation driven by the current Prime Minister of Israel?
I think I have just recognised that there was an intransigence on all sides to finally actually implement an agreement that would have taken matters forward. But it wasn't an intransigence from one side. It ultimately collapsed because the negotiation between the lead parties could not be supported by the communities that they represented. Mr Cole-Hamilton also said there should not be reward. But I mean, one of the chilling things, and I want to say this, but one of the chilling things that I heard over the summer was a representative of the Palestinian people say that one of the fruits of October 7th was the decision of governments to now unconditionally recognise the state of Palestine. And that, I think, is something that is chilling, because it implies that the actions of October the 7th were justified and have brought about a successful outcome. And I think we should all be concerned by that, irrespective of the view that we might come to in today's debate. I think I need to make some progress, though, however. Neil Bibby, I want to thank him for drawing the distinction I asked for between the current administration in Israel and equating that and conflating it with the entire people of Israel, or indeed the entire Jewish community. And I've got the letter that I know that the First Minister has now received in response to the meeting that he and Mr Robertson had on Monday. And in it, there is this underlying concern that I think it will be important for us to address, that by accepting the situation now, we have not suddenly found fault with the Jewish community, and that there isn't now a need for additional security for all of them. And it's important to understand why. Because the members of my community, the Jewish community in my constituency, when I go to Yom HaShoah commemorations each year, on the screen are the names of those who were massacred in the Holocaust, belonging to almost every family in the community of Eastwood. And they live in fear of that reality as they see the prosecution of events in the Middle East. And our duty is to ensure that that community, that all our communities here in Scotland, remain safe and free and are treated fairly and with respect. First Minister.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Carroll for giving way. And let me take this opportunity to reinforce the point that I made to the representatives of the Jewish community on Monday, that they are valued members of our society, a valued community, and that their safety and their security is as important to me as is the safety and the security of any other citizen within Scotland, and we will work with them to support that security and that safety.
Jackson Carter.
The First Minister knows how much I appreciate the comments that he makes. I did take issue with one thing that Pauline McNeill said, and I understood possibly the motivation of it when she said Israel is no longer a democracy. But a key right of a democracy is the right to protest. And there have been widespread protests in Israel involving hundreds of thousands of people who are challenging the actions of the current government. I doubt anyone protesting in Gaza against Hamas has the same leniency or tolerance should they choose to do so. But also amongst those protesting are the hostages' families themselves, because they have the obvious concern that the prosecution of events in Gaza by the Netanyahu administration is not designed to see their loved ones returned alive. It's clear that that is no longer a priority of Netanyahu, and that is shameful, because this began as a conquest to get back the hostages' families who were taken, and that should be the fundamental aim of any Israeli government action.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank you to Jackson Carlo. The point I was making was if you shoot a Palestinian, as I mentioned earlier, and there's no trial, no accountability, then surely the member would accept that that is not in compliance with what a normal country would do in terms of holding to account criminality. And that's my concern. Does he understand where I was coming from?
I do appreciate that point, but I expect that the Netanyahu government not only will have to face the judgment of the international community, it will have to face the judgment of the people in Israel too, many of whom I think are now deeply concerned by the actions of that government, but who still nonetheless believe in their own implicit right to exist as a state. Presiding Officer, I realise I am out of time, and I just want to say that I've listened carefully to the debate this afternoon, and I've listened to the speeches that have been made. And unfortunately, I do believe that in supporting what is a motion without timing, it would be seen that I would be, and our side would be, supporting the immediate recognition of Palestine when we believe that should be in the context of a wider settlement. We won't vote against the motion this evening, but we will abstain.
Thank you, Mr Carnell. And I now call on Minister Ivan McKee to respond to the debate. Up to 9 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, it's been a powerful and sobering debate, and the contributions from across the chamber reflect the depth of concern felt in Scotland about the unfolding catastrophe in Gaza, and our shared conviction that words must be matched by action. The ICJ in January 2024 found a prima facie case that the Israeli government was committing genocide and issued provisional measures. As the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary have stated, we have taken account of international law and the UK's international treaty obligations, which we are required to do, not least by the Ministerial Code. It is, of course, ultimately for international courts to decide if genocide has occurred, but, and this is very important, governments cannot wait until it is too late. History has taught us that hard lesson. We need to use every lever available to us, economic, humanitarian and political. Scotland is not waiting for others to lead. Alongside calling for the UK Government to act, we are taking steps to match our actions, to make sure our actions match our values. We will pause new awards of public money to arms companies whose products or services are provided to countries where there is plausible evidence of genocide being committed by that country, and that will include Israel. Defence companies seeking support from the Scottish Government will have to demonstrate their products are not involved militarily with Israel. We are instructing relevant delivery bodies where possible not to provide support facilitating trade between Scotland and Israel. And we are calling on the UK Government to go further. The suspension of new trade negotiations with Israel was a start, but it's time to withdraw from the existing UK-Israel trade partnership agreement altogether, given the human rights situation in Gaza. We call for an end to all arms exports to Israel, which are being used against Palestinians in serious violation of international humanitarian law. And we are also urging the UK to follow Ireland's lead and prohibit the import of goods produced in illegal Israeli settlements. These steps symbolise our commitment in this matter, but they are not just symbolic gestures. They are targeted, practical measures designed to prevent Scotland's public resources being complicit in the suffering of civilians. Regarding our humanitarian response, Scotland has a proud record of global solidarity. In Gaza, that solidarity has been put into action. We have committed £1.3 million in humanitarian aid to date, supporting UNRWA, the Disasters Emergency Committee, SCIAF and Mercy Corps. Today we go further with another £1 million in support, £400,000 to establishing the Gaza Hopes Field Readiness Hub in Dundee, unlocking $15 million for a deployable field hospital, and £600,000 to the UNOCHA-led humanitarian fund for the occupied Palestinian territories. We are also preparing to welcome up to 20 injured children from Gaza for treatment in Scottish hospitals. These children have endured unimaginable trauma. Scotland will offer them care, dignity and hope. This is what it means to be a good global citizen, not just to speak but to act. And turning to our pressures on the UK Government, Scotland is using its voice to demand accountability. We are calling on the UK Government to recognise the state of Palestine unconditionally and irreversibly as a first step to a two-state solution. Recognition is a gift, is not a gift, it is a right, and it's long overdue. The Conservative amendment says that recognition should happen at an appropriate time. This Scottish Government believes that now is an appropriate time, and indeed we are far beyond that time. For that reason, we will not supporting the Conservative amendment. We also urge the UK to join South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice and to commit to implementing any arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. And we call for sanctions on Israeli ministers complicit in illegal settlements and military actions that target civilians. Scotland will not be complicit and we will not be silent. Presiding Officer, this debate is a test of our values. A defining tragedy of this century is occurring before our eyes. We are witnessing a humanitarian disaster of historic proportions. Over 63,000 Gazans have been killed, famine has been declared, hospitals have been bombed, journalists have been targeted, children are dying from malnutrition and contaminated water. Presiding Officer, I want to reflect on some of the comments made by colleagues in the Chamber. As always, the contributions from Polly McNeill and Humza Yousaf were significant and talk to the real impact that the tragedy is having on individuals in Gaza and, as Paul McNeill identified, within the West Bank too. And to anyone that says that if Hamas wasn't there, this wouldn't be happening, they just need to look at what's happening in the West Bank, where Hamas obviously isn't present. I want to very importantly note the near unanimity in support of the actions been proposed by the Scottish Government. I don't think a single member has spoken against those measures, and that is hugely welcome and talks to the considerable work undertaken to get us to this place with a well-crafted package of measures. And I also have to say it's a testament to the leadership of the First Minister, who's personally been hugely involved in this work over the past days and weeks. There are some specific contributions I also want to comment on. I listened with incredulity to Brian Whittle's contribution, and just to explain, the reason aid has not been provided is exclusively the fault of the Israeli government and Israeli military. This is not just a matter of fact on the ground. It is also the case that in international law it is the responsibility of the occupying power to ensure supply of essentials to the civilian population. There should be no doubt about that. And that's particularly profound where we have seen deliberate targeting and execution of aid workers on the ground by the Israeli military. I also want to comment on Jackson Carlaw's contribution. To be honest, I found his summing up to be more helpful, but I also want to comment on some of the things he said in his opening speech. Hamza Youssef made the point that one of the defining characteristics of genocide is that there's never any shortage of those who deny it was happening or looked the other way at the time. And to be honest, I found Jackson Carlaw's opening speech consisted of deflection, denial, obfuscation, a masterclass in whataboutery. There is no justification for genocide. The responsibility lies with the Israeli government in law and in practice. History will judge us, as it does in all genocides, on how we respond today to those events. Never again means never again for anyone, and that needs to be recognised. And I wasn't going to comment on John Mason's contribution, but I just want to give 2 points of fact. From the River to the Sea originally appeared in the 1977 manifesto of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. That's where that comes from. And Jimmy Carter, who he talked glowingly about, was very clear that what was happening in Israel, even back then, was apartheid. So, Presiding Officer, let me close with some wrapping up comments. We were all horrified by the attacks on Israel by Hamas in October 2023. That caused the worst loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. We must not underestimate the trauma this caused to the people of Israel and to Jews globally. Hamas, of course, must release all hostages immediately and fully engage in peace. However, the actions of the Israeli military at the behest of the Netanyahu government in Gaza has gone far beyond a legitimate response. We will not be a bystander in this crisis. To those in this crisis who are in suffering, we stand with you. We stand for a future where Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side in peace and security. Scotland's actions are not just about policy, they're about principle. We are guided by our values, compassion, justice and the belief in the equal worth of every human life. In the face of mass suffering, neutrality is not an option. We must act, and we are acting because, and I say it again, history will remember those who chose to speak and those who remained silent. Let it be said today that Scotland spoke. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Palestine, and it's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 18695 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out changes to business. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 18695 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 18696 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme, and I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. The question is that motion 18696 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of business motions 18697 and 18698 on timetabling of bills at stage 1. I ask any member who wishes to speak to the motions to press their request to speak button. And I call on Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motions.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to these motions. Therefore, the question is that motions 18697 and 18698 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motions are therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 18699 and 18700 on approval of an SSI and 18701 on designation of a lead committee.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on these motions will be put at decision time. And there are 5 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 18686.3 in the name of Jackson Carlaw, which seeks to amend Motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson on Palestine, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 18686.3 in the name of Jackson Carlaw, which seeks to amend Motion 1869686 in the name of Angus Robertson on Palestine, be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Jenny Gilruth for a point of order.
My app would not connect, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Gilruth. We'll ensure that's recorded. I call Pam Duncan-Glancy for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My app would not connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Duncan Clancy. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 18686.3 in the name of Jackson Carlaw is yes 26, no 83. There were 5 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 18686.2 in the name of Neil Bibby, which seeks to amend motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson on Palestine, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 18686.2 in the name of Neil Bibby is yes 83, no 25. There were 6 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that amendment 18686.1 in the name of Patrick Harvey, which seeks to amend motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson on Palestine, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 18686.1 in the name of Patrick Harvey is yes 62, no 31. There were 21 abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson as amended on Palestine be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson, as amended, is yes 65, no 24. There were 26 abstentions. The motion as amended is therefore agreed. And I propose to ask a single question on 3 parliamentary bureau motions. Does any member object? No member objects. Therefore, the final question is that motions 18699 and 18700 on approval of an SSIs, and 18701 on designation of a lead committee in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motions are therefore agreed. And that concludes decision time, and we'll now move on to members' business in the name of Kenneth Gibson.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.